in 1 hour.
Yeah. We're still on schedule? Because I thought it's supposed to be on at 8:15. So
your talk is 15:30 CEST.
Right.
But now we were planning to have Bob Zubrin at 14:30.
Right.
But we don't see him appearing.
Right.
So then I should take over first.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, maybe
Right.
We could then advance Professor Werner, if it's okay. Even though I think some people are really eager to listen to you, Professor Werner.
Ah, Bernard, don't call me professor.
Jan. Okay, it's good academic. At the time, so I wonder.
But you see, Bernard, if we are waiting, we are losing time because then.
So we have two possibilities. We advance you, Jan, or we ask Joe to take the slot of Bob.
Well, I can do anyone. I think perhaps we'll have Jan go first.
Okay.
If he's ready.
Yeah,
okay,
I'm ready.
So let's do this way, and in the meantime, we try to get.
We make Joe now?
No, Jan, Professor Jan Werner. Yes, so it's my pleasure. Okay, we have to show good flexibility in scheduling, and in any case, these talks are they are recorded, and so nobody will lose them. And so, it's my pleasure to introduce Jan Werner, who is a civil engineer who has been leading the German Aerospace Center, DLR, and then has been the Director General of the European Space Agency. He was my chief, and actually I worked also for him as an advisor. I hope you have good memories from this time, but he has also been a very strong ambassador promoter for the Moon Village, and also a number of disruptive and constructive initiatives in the space world, but also connecting with the rest of our society demands. So, Jan, the floor.
Okay. So, Bernard, thank you very much. And you should tell me when, because of the other talk, the other speaker, whether I should hurry or whether I should make it slow.
You can take your 20 minutes.
Okay. Okay, then I will start, and I hope you can see now my screen. I hope this is working. So yes, the topic you gave me was key scientific and technology challenges start civilian space development. And I must tell you, I changed the slide. I changed the title, not scientific and technology, but I would like to give some further comments of what are the challenges we are facing right now and in the near future. I hope this fits to the program. So first of all, we know the global challenges. You know all of them. And what we have to tell people, especially politicians, that space can deliver things for each and every of the global challenges. I will not go into details right now because I will put just some of them on the table for today's speech. And then also what we have to really try to do every time, we have to give people a feeling why we are doing space. Is it because of prestige or pioneering or tourism? I believe these are aspects, but this is not the reason we are doing it. And you see here another list, which I believe is very strong, from spirit of discovery over navigation, experiments, innovation, to ambassador functions, and finally also inspiration. Now, the ESA Convention is a very good basis for a discussion about civil space activities, because what it says in its convention from 1975, it should work exclusively for peaceful purposes. I think this is a very good sentence. It opens up the possibility of what you are doing, but it also limits you in a certain way. And I believe this is very good, because what we see already is, of course, that right now, that what I saw before, that space is a bridge over troubled water, is not any longer the case. We have right now a more complicated situation. It started, and we did not recognize it enough, in 2014 with the Crimea conflict. We still could bridge. We still had ISS. We still had the other programs together with Russia. And I would like to make at this very point the difference between Russian people and Putin. This is not identical, and I believe this is something we have to do in the near future. We should not really merge the leader Putin and the people, the scientists and others in Russia in just one point. So this, when the Ukrainian war started at the Akatech, the German Academy for Science and Engineering, started also to give a reaction, and it was and I am still the president, and we said not only consternation, sympathy, and solidarity with the people, but at the same time we said we have to look forward, putting security, resilience, and sustainability on the table. And what is very important, that all of these aspects, safety, security, resilience, and sustainability, are linked to each other, and they are also linked in space. And it's clear it's not for free. You don't get these points for free. You have to pay for it. It's price. And the basis should be innovation, as it is space, and the result should be a strategic responsibility. But what happened after the invasion to Ukraine? First thing is, for instance, ExoMars. The next mission was stopped immediately, which I believe is really a pity that it was stopped. And also from the Russian side, there was some announcement. I have to apologize that I have it only in German language. There was some announcement that maybe we will deorbit the International Space Station. And then we saw Russian cosmonauts like this, and there was some debate whether it's solidarity with the Ukrainian people or what it is. And I was sure it's not solidarity, not at all. And we know now it was not solidarity. The same three people you see over here, you saw them 2 days ago with this flag, which is a flag not of Russia, but of Luhansk. So the area where the Russians are right now on the Ukrainian territory. So, okay, this is one point. The political aspect is one key challenge for the future. We are more and more politicized. Another aspect is, of course, the money. How to get money. This is a very important point for space. I can just look back 3 years ago. I was still the Director General of the European Space Agency, and I had to go to the member states to ask for money. And what we did is we asked people first, and we did not ask them, what do you think you have to pay, but what is the annual amount that you would like to see going forward for the development of European space activities. And it was very interesting to get as an average value 287 euros per citizen per year. 287 euros per citizen per year. This is what European citizens said they are ready to pay. Now, at the same time, we looked back in history to John F. Kennedy. You know his famous speech from the 60s. And he said at that time also a cost of space. And what he said in 1961 was that each and every one should pay 50 cents per week. If you calculate this with all the inflation and blah, blah, blah to today, you come up to 210 euros per year. It's an interesting comparison. However, we are in Europe, we are far away from that. We were asking in 2019 as a pure ESA budget, only 8 euros per citizen per year. I believe this is also a good argument. So money is an important point we have to consider. The other point is we know that these global challenges, they have some special nature. And you see here, I have two global challenges on the same page. On the left-hand side, you see the coronavirus. On the right-hand side, you see the climate change. And what is important, both are very similar. You first have to discover the challenge, for instance, the virus in China. You then can monitor by daily infection rates. You can raise awareness to the people, and finally, you can try to mitigate and or even adapt. And looking to the right-hand side concerning the climate change, we have a similar situation. At first, we had to discover the climate change. It was discovered, as you all know, on planet Venus. And then we found that there is also something on the Earth. Then we had to monitor the climate change, for instance, by measuring the sea level rise from satellites. You see here the increase. And we have to raise awareness. And John Kerry did it in a very nice way, because what he said in 2015 in Paris was, now I know there are still a few who insist that climate change is a one big hoax, even a political conspiracy. My friends, these people are so out of touch with science that they believe rising sea levels don't matter, because in their view, the extra water is just going to spill out over the sides of a flat Earth. I believe this is a very good sentence to raise awareness. And there's another picture which I showed already before. This is Samantha Cristoforetti, a European astronaut with an Italian passport. And she has these two pictures. On the left-hand side, you see the very thin atmosphere around our Earth. On the right-hand side, you see Samantha with a plant in the Kazakh steppe. And her face is saying, I'm so happy that I'm back on Earth. So this is a clear message raising awareness. Now we come to the mitigation and adaptation. And mitigation, we can do something from space by using, for instance, Galileo, the very excellent satellite navigation system. We can use it together with Earth observation and telecommunication, for instance, to decrease the number of contrails and to reduce route lengths of aircraft, because contrails have a big influence on the climate. There's about 5% of our clouds come from contrails. So by using navigation, Earth observation, telecommunication, space can really reduce the effect of contrails. Now, the next step is safety and security in space. We all know that there is some hazard, for instance, that meteorites will hit the Earth. And again, we should not just observe and look for it, we should do something against it. And together with NASA, ESA is now working on the mission which DART, which should hit an asteroid. And from Hera, from the European side, we will observe the effect. And by that, we hopefully get something to learn about how to play billiard in space later on. So we can do something against that. Now, another hazard is, of course, the solar flare. It's totally underestimated because people don't have the experience. Also, they know that there is the aurora, the northern lights, but they don't fear about it. Also, we know that in 1859, there was the Carrington effect, and we had in 1989 a strong flare over Canada, and we had at the beginning of this year a rather strong flare which even killed nearly 40 of the satellites of Elon Musk, not by electrical influence, but by thermal influence to the atmosphere. So unfortunately, we cannot stop the sun from shining, but what we can do is we can work on a early forecast instrument. And again, we are doing this together with the Americans. America will go to the L1 point, ESA will go to L5, and by the information of both, we will get at least an early warning, which should be then used on Earth. Now, the third hazard from space is, of course, ourselves. With space debris, we had already a collision between Iridium and Cosmos, and there are so many satellites, thousands of satellites in orbit, thousands of satellites which are not working any longer. So the danger is increasing and increasing. And what we have to do is, of course, we have to remove space debris. This is number one. We have to avoid space debris in the future. And I believe we should also have more commercialization in that aspect. So the removal is one thing. The avoidance, for instance, is by using artificial intelligence to operate satellites in order not to collide. This is a very important point. So this comes to the point also where space economy and space ecology meet each other. In space traffic management, we should have not only a view to space economy, but more and more, we should look to the space also and to keep it clean. And therefore, for me, space traffic management has, for the avoidance of avoidable debris, we should do that in future. All satellites have either on board a deorbiting system, which is redundant and independent, or the company which is launching a satellite has a contract with a deorbiting service company, or as we do with bottles and other things, we give a deposit at a trustful organization, and then in case the satellite is not working any longer, this deposit is used. But we have also ecological aspects. So we should look also to the production of space aspects, green production, green propulsion, very important. And also we should use only climate harmless material. Think about the deorbiting of so many satellites, having aluminum, having all the nice materials, magnesia, and so on, titanium. entering into the upper part of our atmosphere. So we should, in the future, go for more green material in that, and also looking for circular economy in space. Now, a very complicated aspect is my final example, and this is, you know that in close to Aquarius, there is a very nice solar system called TRAPPIST-1. It's only 39 light years away, and this solar system has 7 planets and 1 sun. And when astrophysicists looked to it, they said, oh, these planets are too close to each other. That's not possible. That cannot be a stable system. And there was not a physicist, not an astrophysicist, not an engineer, but a musician who looked into this solar system. And what he did is he multiplied the orbital frequency of the different planets by 212 million. And by that, you get a sound. And now I hope that you can hear the sound. I would like to see Adriano to reacting and tell me whether you can really hear it. Adriano, can you hear it?
Yes. Yeah.
Now? Can you hear the sound of the planets? Can you hear it? Hopefully. Good. So if you listen to this sound, it's obvious they are in a harmonic distance. So that it was a musician who found out what the secret of this solar system is. And therefore, I believe interdisciplinarity is a very important thing also for space in the future. Finally, we are in a shift of paradigm between the private and the public sector. And this is a very important part. And the question is, what is the public side to be doing in the future? From my point of view, the public side, the governments should be a customer for space activities. They should be investors in space. And so they should be brokers to combine different actors worldwide. That comes to my conclusions about the key challenges. So we have a political crisis, which is a challenge. We see a repoliticization of space. We see that the public space budget is a difficulty. We need to see space not only as monitoring something or doing something here or there, but we also should look to a comprehensive contribution from discovery to mitigation. We should take care of ecological aspects also for us, not only saying we see the sea level rise, but what about our launchers? What about our satellites? What about all of this? Safety and security. I mentioned also interdisciplinarity and the shift of paradigm. Thank you very much for your attention.
Excellent. Yes, thanks. Very clear discussion of some of the possible, of the challenges to space exploration. So you kept very well your time. Any question from the audience? So actually, you introduced the topic of space safety and security, and so now there is, and you mentioned also that there are elements that we cannot predict, like geopolitical conflict on Earth that we didn't really predict in the way we organize our activities. So what is a robust path to organize the space activities, you believe, now in this context?
I believe the secret is the word resilience. So I don't know whether you followed all the Apollo missions. I did. Yeah. Apollo 15, one of the 3 parachutes failed. But because 2 were enough, it was a redundant system. So it was resilient, so not to fail. So this is something we should take into account, the resilience of our structures. This is the only possibility. But for geopolitical aspects is, of course, difficult. I am in favor of further cooperation with partners all around the world. And as I said, we should not just make our decisions to one or the other leaders. We should really look to the scientists, to the engineers. I know this is a difficult topic, but I'm really strong in favor of having international cooperation for the future. We need to be one tiny blue dot.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. I see that you had the opportunity in the past to visit the Herschel Observatory. I would recommend. It's a beautiful place, and I hope that we will see you in presence here. It has a beautiful artifact and even the largest refractor telescope in the world, 21 meters. So we are looking forward having a future event with you here.
Yeah, I know the place. It's a beautiful place. I know it. You're right.
Excellent.
Okay.
So with this, so thanks, Jan. And now we move to Michel.
Give me 2 minutes.
Yeah.
To do something.
Yeah.
Okay.
We move. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to call. So thanks you. To call Michel Hanlon. And so she's going to talk about the legal aspect. So the space law and regulatory framework for civilian space development. And so we know well, Michelle, she's a member of our Space Renaissance International, but also she's the lead of For All Moonkind, but as well, she's the president of the National Space Society in the US. So maybe in the meantime, if you want to, I think I've lost.
Because I have to send the link to this Zoom.
Yeah, that's okay.
Because we were late with the dinner.
Yeah, that's okay. Just I need some. Is there a spare microphone? Because this one is out of power. Maybe is it okay that you start introducing yourself orally and some of the topic, and then I think the presentation will flow.
Perfect.
Yes,
yes,
thank
you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bernard. So I'm Michelle Hanlon. I'm a space lawyer.
Yeah, yeah, but she's speaking, and you can do what you want.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm filling time. I teach at the University of Mississippi School of Law. We're the only university accredited by the American Bar Association that has an air and space law program, and we are one of only 4 air and space law programs in the world. So we're really proud of that. I'm also, as noted, the president and co-founder of For All Moonkind, which is the only organization in the world that's focused on protecting human heritage in outer space. And so when we think about that, I like to make people think about, the Apollo 11 lunar landing site is something everyone thinks about. But one of our speakers earlier today talked about the Chang'e 4 growing lettuce on the moon. So the very first time a human breakthrough to actually be able to produce food on another celestial body. These are sites that have no protection under international law at this point in time, and that we think need to be recognized the same way we recognize heritage here on Earth through the UNESCO World Heritage and other conventions like that. I'm also president of the National Space Society, which is, it started in the US, but it's an international civic-minded organization. We're an advocacy group that advocates for space. I'm trying to move away from the concept of space settlement, but building human communities in space. So again, hearkening back to what we heard this morning, talking about really meeting, the demand of our species to move ourselves off this Earth and save our planet by going into space and doing things like moving heavy industry off of Earth and so forth. Are we ready? There's my slides. So I am going to talk today about space law and the regulatory framework for civilian space development. As Jan Werner just pointed out, we are at a paradigm shift in terms of space activities right now. We're moving from space as a realm where governments were only active to a place where civilians, private entities, individuals are active. Next slide, please. Can I advance or? So the outer, but what is not catching up, or what is not staying up is our law. So space is not actually lawless. A lot of people talk about the Wild West and it's the last frontier. It's not. We have laws in space already. We have 5 treaties, 4 of which have been widely ratified by the international community: the Outer Space Treaty, Liability Convention, Registration Convention, Rescue and Return Agreement. The Moon Agreement is the 5th treaty, which has only been ratified by 18 nations. So people will say it's a dead treaty. It's not a dead treaty. It's a very much alive treaty, but it only applies to 18 nations. On top of that, we have what we call soft law. We have a lot of UN declarations and resolutions that have come out of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which talk about space activities. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk just about the Outer Space Treaty, but the very first thing to notice about the Outer Space Treaty, it is that it offers principles and guidelines for the activities of states in outer space. It's not rules of conduct for people in space. It is guidelines and principles regarding the activities of states. And that's when the Outer Space Treaty was negotiated in the 1960s, late 50s and 60s, it was only states that were active in outer space. But even so, the Outer Space Treaty is a wonderful document. Why? Because above all else, one of the main premises is that space is for everyone. And we can see that now. I can't read my red highlights. That was a poor choice. But the exploration and use of space belongs to all of humanity, right? Outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, are free for exploration and for use by all. There are very few restrictions in our activities, in space. It is free for everybody. Everyone can explore every celestial body. Everyone has access. So, that sounds great when there's only 2 countries and, 1 or 2 launches every 2 or 3 years. But things are different now, right? I mean, we're really seeing a lot more movement. And space, which is infinite, indeed, our orbit's not infinite. The moon isn't infinite. Our closest celestial bodies aren't infinite. So what does it mean to have freedom of access? Next slide, please. So we do have a few restrictions in the outer space. We have Article 2, which says you cannot claim a nation. You cannot claim sovereign territory in outer space. This now belongs to the United States. This now belongs to China. We have seen different interpretations of that Article 2 now, and the Artemis Accords represent one major interpretation of Article 2, which is to say that the 20 nations that have signed the Artemis Accords, which are sort of a memorandum of understanding between nations, interpret Article 2 to say, okay, you can't go up and claim territory, but if you extract resources, then you can claim those resources as your own and sell those resources and do whatever you want with those resources. Now, this is an interpretation that some people don't agree with. However, what we've seen with the Artemis Accords is that the major nations, spacefaring nations, do not disagree. In the Artemis Accords, we include Mexico, the UK, France, UAE, Luxembourg. We do not include China and Russia at this point, but neither China nor Russia has argued against this concept that you can use the resources that you extract. And why is that? Because it's common sense, right? If you are going to go to space, if you are going to build settlements in space, you can't bring all your materials with you. So it's just common sense. You're going to have to be able to use those resources the way you want to. But that's one of the few restrictions. The others, in Article 4 of the Outer Space Treaty, we see that space is intended to be for peaceful purposes. Now, the Outer Space Treaty itself doesn't say outer space shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. It says celestial bodies, the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. And it also says that we will not put weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons in our orbit or any place in space. Okay, so we have these restrictions. Again, interesting, and I'm a lawyer, so I go right into the details and so forth. But, we can have a war in space. It's something we have to worry about. And it's something that's really interesting as we see more and more civilian uses of space and civilians in orbit in space. What's going to happen if somebody attacks a civilian satellite? What is the responsibility of a government with respect to that? Article 5, just for completion's sake, is what we call our return and rescue. It's all astronauts are considered the envoys of all humankind. And so this is, again, when we thought we were sending 5 or 10 people, maybe a year tops to space, it made sense. If there's a human in need, in danger, needs help, then all of the nations on Earth are going to work to bring that human back. And think about how that's going to change now as we have tourists in space. Do those tourists, does somebody who's paid $55 million to go into orbit, does that tourist become an astronaut for purposes of the return and rescue, this concept of they will be rescued if something happens to them? Next slide, please. So again, how does the Outer Space Treaty affect today what we're doing in terms of commercial space activities? And that's where we have Article 6, which says states bear responsibility for the activities of their nationals in space. And this is a really, really important provision, because some companies will tell you, oh, the Outer Space Treaty just covers states. That's not true. States have a responsibility to authorize and supervise their nationals. And something that's very unusual in space law, that's very different from anything we're used to in terrestrial law, is that a state is responsible for its national, even if the state didn't know. It doesn't matter. You know, I use this example, I live in the United States. If I, as an American citizen, went to Canada and decided to steal 20 candy bars from the gas station there, then maybe, and I come back to the United States, then maybe the United States will hand me over to Canada and say, you have to face justice in Canada. But the United States is not liable for those 20 candy bars that I stole, right? If I'm on the moon and I'm on a US moon base and there's a Canadian moon base next door, and I go next door and I steal 20 candy bars, the United States is liable for my actions. So instead of just saying, hey, we will return this person who did these bad things to you, committed this crime, Canada can come to the United States and say, you owe us for those 20 candy bars. And so when we talk about getting more and more commercial activities and more private entities in space, we're seeing this conundrum where all private activities are actually national activities. And so think about, we have a lot of companies now talking, 3 or 4 companies talking about building space hotels. What happens if that space hotel is launched in the United States and it has guests from Norway and it has a manager who's from Singapore? The Norwegian guest gets into a fight with the American guest and causes damage to, the Singapore entity or person. That's not just like down here on Earth, you would just sue the hotel. That's not what would happen in space. Because of the way space activities are regulated, those would become national issues and national crimes and things for which nations are liable. And added to that, the Outer Space Treaty and its progeny talk about launching state liability. And so that makes sense, because you think if you launch an object into outer space, you ought to be responsible for that object, and you're going to owe somebody if that object causes damage on Earth or some other object in space. But we define 4 different launching states. We have the state that procured the launch. So imagine if you are Ghana and you ask for somebody to build you a satellite and you send that satellite, you've procured that launch. The nation that actually launches, so often it'll be the United States, but it could be the Ukraine, Russia, it could be Japan, it could be China. The territory from which a launch is launched, a rocket, a space object is launched, and the facility from which. So you have the potential for 4 launching states of liability, which means that every time you have an issue in space, you could have at least 4 nations involved. And you can imagine, as lawyers like to slow things down as much as possible, a plaintiff's lawyer is going to just gummy up the works. And in terms of thinking about private investment in space, you have no idea what's going to happen with that. And so this is an untenable situation for commercial space. Next slide, please. So I propose that we need to sort of, again, this is what former Director Werner was saying, we have to face this paradigm shift. We need to think about astral law, not space law. We have to stop thinking about space as a legal regime and start thinking of it as a place where humans are actually going to live and work. We need to think that spacefarers, people who live and work in space, are no longer the agents of their sovereign nations or under the authority of a sponsoring government. If somebody goes to space as a tourist, wherever that tourist is from, be it the United States, be it Japan, be it Russia, the Japan or Russia or the United States shouldn't be liable for things that they do in space. We want to prevent the growth of company towns. We don't want, I don't think Elon Musk is planning to build a company town like the British East India Company, but we don't want that to happen. We want to give humans rights in space. We want to avoid conflict and the high cost of litigation. So again, when we talk about if something happens in space, immediately, what is your plaintiff's lawyer going to do? It's it's going to sue the government because the government has the most pockets, the most money. So we want to actually create, hopefully, ultimately, a space court where all of your litigation goes, or a space arbitration panel, so that we can have one body of law, so we get some certainty with respect to how we delve into space. And we want to assure basic human rights, okay? What do we think about? So we know under the Outer Space Treaty, Article 4 says international law applies in space. And we know that we have a Declaration of Human Rights here that's been agreed by the United Nations. And we know that those human rights include things like the right to own property. So what does that mean? Article 17 of the Declaration of Human Rights, the right to own property, against Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty, you can't own property. We have to figure that out. We also know in the Declaration of Human Rights, it doesn't say that humans have a right to oxygen, because we don't think about that here on Earth. So we need to make sure that our humans in space have that right to oxygen. What are we going to do? What rights should travel? What rights do we have to add for humans in space ethically? Again, we also want to provide that legal certainty. And the fundamental reason we need to actually start making this shift to what I call Astral law is that we are, this entire conference, this entire space renaissance, we are going to space. Our species is going to space. We are a spacefaring species. This is what we exist for. This is it's in our DNA. And so in order to support those humans that are going to end up in space, we need to provide the basis, the foundation of law that moves us away from the sovereign paradigm and into this new universal paradigm. Next slide, please. So again, space is not a legal regime, it's a place, and we need to recognize that. And so when I talk about Astral law, this is an idea that was first came up with 40 years ago, Henry Glaser and George Robinson. Astral law contemplates the practice of law in outer space. The direct subjects of space law are sovereign nations. We see that with the Outer Space Treaty. The direct subjects of astral law are natural and legal persons in space. So astral law focuses not upon space as a legal regime, but on space as a place. Next slide, please. And so why do we need astral law? And I love this quote from George Robinson writing 40, 50 years ago. The achievement of our human imperative and of the global and interplanetary constitutions necessary for its realization will be one of the most monumentally delicate, difficult, long-term projects ever undertaken by a human civilization. It is the most difficult project ever undertaken by any human civilization. A poor beginning will seriously threaten its achievement. We owe this to our future. We owe this to our history. Because a lot of people ask me, do humans actually deserve to go to space? We've done so many terrible things here on Earth. Do we have the right to sort of think of ourselves as destined to be in space? And I say, it's our responsibility. Imagine if our civilization were to die within the next 100 years, within the next 200 years. What does that say about all of the people, the ancient civilizations who came before us? All of those dreams, all of those people, all of those individuals who dreamed, who mapped the stars for us, all of those individuals who helped us reach the stars. When we talk about Apollo 11 and the first humans landing on the moon, we have to recognize that this was not an American achievement. It was a human achievement. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took those first steps on the moon, not on behalf of all humanity. Sure, they did it on behalf of all humanity, but they did it because of all humanity. We do not get to the moon without our entire history of human evolution. And so we owe it to our entire human history, as well as our entire future history, to get the law right now. And that means we have to move away from that sovereign paradigm and start thinking about private individuals and companies in space. Next slide, please. So I won't, this is just sort of thinking, I've went through a little bit when we talk about private space station. I'll share my slides so you can think more about if we have multiple vendors in space, multiple nationalities in space, how it will all become sort of diplomatic issues. Next slide, please. And then the next one. So next slide, please. So what are we talking about? So what we don't want is a top down. We don't want the governments coming in and saying, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to do it. Because we've seen too many times that governments can actually kill innovation, right? So what do we have now? We have the Artemis Accords, but those are also between governments. We have the Space Resources Working Group, which came up with the Code of Conduct. But again, it was for governments, suggesting to governments how they can regulate. We have the UN COPUOS, which now has a working group on space resource utilization. But again, that's working at a government level. So what are we primed for right now? Next slide, please. We are primed for the commercial space industry to take control. This commercial space industry must show that it can act responsibly and work together to adopt and implement a code of conduct that the commercial industry will uphold. And what will happen then? Because we know that it takes a long time for national and international regulations to be implemented and put in place. And we know that they're difficult to enforce. So if we can convince our commercial space industry to act responsibly, and I think at this point, the industry is still very, it's in infancy, and I think it'd be very rare to find a commercial space company that isn't responsible. Now is the time to implement a code of conduct that the commercial space industry can agree to. And then when the governments catch up, then the space industry can say, hey, we've been doing this all along. And the government will say, oh, yeah, that's great. Because you know what? Politicians like the easy answer. And let's say, yeah, we'll just implement that. We've seen that happen in industries in the United States all over the place. The banking industry regulated itself, and the US government adopted those regulations. Next slide, please. And so my suggestion is that we start with something very small. What can we all agree on? We can all agree on human rights. We can all agree that humans in space ought to have oxygen. And so at the very least, I think we can start with a model that affirms basic rights of all spacefarers. This is not asking a lot of our commercial space industry. These are, when you're paying, an astronaut is paying $55 million for the privilege of going to space. I think it's pretty clear that the company is going to say, yeah, we'll make sure you have oxygen and we'll protect you. And we'll also, I think, the commercial industry ought to agree to some sort of arbitration, some sort of council that all disputes will go to. And so we can build a body of law with respect to commercial space industry. And so for the rest of my presentation, I'm just gonna share my slides with you after this, but I offer a code of conduct that I've built based on the International Space Station Code of Conduct. And it talks about what we expect to see, what rights humans ought to have, human tourists, human workers ought to have in space, and how that can form the basis for a very foundational, very simple, very easy to agree to code of conduct for commercial industry in space within the filling in the gaps of space law and the Outer Space Treaty. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Michel, we just have a time for a short question if you have any. And before that, I would like to give you on behalf of the organizer this beautiful book, Blick in das Weltall.
Thank you.
And so, yeah, a question about Michel's presentation? No, it was
Could I ask one?
yes, please, Joe. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Michel, Joe Pelton. I just wonder whether you think the CONFERS process and their attempts to create standards for on-orbit servicing and proximity operations is a good example of what you have in mind as a process.
Absolutely. I don't know if you can hear me, but absolutely. I think that the more we have things like that, and that is, I think ideally we're going to see more and more opportunities like that, where we have organizations like CONFERS looking at very specific decisions, but we're good at specific avenues like space traffic management. But if we can then have another group looking specifically at human rights, and then if we get enough agreement along the different paths, then we can unite those paths. Again, I think the key is to have one place that is adjudicating and making decisions so that we have one body of law and not separate specific areas of law.
Good. So we have a question from the audience.
Okay. So I don't know if that will address the question of danger of militarization of space? Have you? Because when you look at the United Nations space law, which was in the Office of Outer Space Affairs in the 1950s, maybe not so well known internationally as a treaty, but it's, I think, a binding treaty that says that space is the domain of humankind, and that militarization of space is absolutely out of the question. Now, do you think that the US Space Command is violating that fundamental law?
So as a lawyer, I'm going to say the Outer Space Treaty does not say that space shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. The Outer Space Treaty says that the moon and other celestial bodies shall be used exclusively for peaceful purposes, and that you shall not place weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons anywhere in space. So there's a huge gap there. And fundamentally, when we think about how space activities started, they started as military activities. And so it would be false to say space is used exclusively for peaceful purposes even today. Are there any violations of that provision right now? No, I don't think SpaceCom is. I don't think China is, or Russia, or anybody is violating the Outer Space Treaty, the words of the Outer Space Treaty. The preamble of the Outer Space Treaty says space should be used exclusively for peaceful purposes. But again, when you think about the history of our uses of space, we're still looking at the fact that the very first satellites were reconnaissance satellites. And so the militarization of space has already been a part of our fabric of our existence. So
you can say that about the internet, which was started by the defense industry, that we wouldn't allow the internet to be used for cyber attacks. We would say that this is an act of aggression. Could we say the same thing about, I mean, you don't put small weapons or hand fire guns in space. It's about mass destruction weapons, and this would really pose a grave danger if we don't put a stop or say explicitly that this is no way that the industry, private or governmental, should go.
I agree 100%, and that's one of the things that we're talking about. And the United States was one of the first nations to categorically, unilaterally say we are not going to use debris creating ASAT tests anymore. This is something that the international community absolutely must address, is we have to preserve the peace in our orbit. I agree completely, but it is not, right now, there are no violations of the Outer Space Treaty, either by ASAT tests or any nation.
Okay, thank you very much,
Thank you
Michel.
so much.
A very interesting presentation and question and debate. So,
Thank you so much.
yes,
for
thank
having
you.
me. Yeah,
Thank you,
appreciate
Michel. You got your book, good. And now we go naturally to space safety, and that's the object of the next talk by Joe Pelton. Joe Pelton, who is also a member of our Space Renaissance International. He's a vice president in the board, and also he has been dean of the International Space University, and now he's leading this initiative, Assess Worldwide. So he will talk about space safety. Sure.
Okay, can we have the first slide? First of all, Guten Tag. It's a great pleasure to be able to speak to you from Washington, D.C. I want to thank Bernard as president of SRI, and Adriano, who is the founding president of SRI, and particularly to Sabine Hines, who is the inspiration and organizer of this conference. Thank you all for your efforts, and the pleasure to be able to speak. If we could have the first slide to come up. I want to talk to you today about a brief history of what has happened in space over the last over half century. And after I've done that, I would like to explain why I've recounted this history and some of the problems that this development has brought forward, and the issues that ACES is attempting to address as a result of the major developments of space. So we can have the next slide. So Sputnik was the world's first satellite in October of 1957 and launched the space age. Next slide. Explorer 1 was the US first satellite, and it discovered the Van Allen belts, which is very important in terms of protecting our planet against solar flares. Next slide. Early Bird was launched in 1965. It was the first geosynchronous satellite for telecommunications, but it was the first global private enterprise activities, which many have followed. Next slide. We had the moon landing in 1969 with Apollo 11, and we are hoping to see the Artemis program with a new moon landing in the next few years. Next slide. In 71, we had the Mariner in orbit around Mars, and then on July 4th, Independence Day in the US, we had the Vikings landing in 1974. Next slide. We had the Space Shuttle launch in 1981. Next slide. We had the Mir Space Station, which began in 1989 and lasted through 2001 and was actually considered stage 1 of the International Space Station. Next slide. We had the Hubble telescope deployed in 1990. And here are some images from the telescope, many millions of which have now been developed. Next slide. We had the first launch of Ariane 5 in 2005, and it became the dominant Western commercial market launcher until the Falcon 9 reusable vehicles came online. Next slide. We had the International Space Station deployment, of which more than a dozen spacefaring nations around the world have participated in actively. But it is interesting in terms of Michelle's comments. It was legally organized with each country being the franchise owner of their parts, and was not Astral law, but it was actually each country controlling their modules. Next slide. The Japan H2 launch occurred first in 2005, and then that launched the Selene mission to the moon in 2007 by Japan. Next slide. The ESA Herschel infrared telescope, which was in service for 2007 to 2013. And here's an image, one of many images from the telescope that shows the formation of a star. Next slide. We had the Falcon, a reusable launcher, which made many commercial markets now possible with resupply missions to the International Space Station beginning in 2012 as commercial ventures. And now SpaceX controls about 2/3 of the world's launch market, including their efforts to launch 7,500 satellites for the Starlink constellation. And there are now plans for tens of thousands of LEO, low Earth orbit satellites to be launched by many countries. China's now filed for a 13,000 constellation network. Next slide. Here is the James Webb telescope, which is just beginning to operate and sending images back from its position way out in space. Next slide. Here is the Chinese Taigong Space Station, currently in deployment. and it's the newest space station now in operation. Next slide. Here is the human landing system that's now being fabricated. You will note that this giant launcher is being modified to land on the moon. And the most amazing aspect is the elevator system that will be equivalent to a 30-story elevator that will be on the external part of this landing system. Again, this was key to the Artemis program. Now going into the future even more, this is the NASA Lunar Orbiter Platform Gateway, which will be first deployed as a habitat and a power system. But then you can see on the other side that this will become a new International Space Station with ESA, JAXA contributing significantly to the development of the various components in this orbiting system that will be about 1/7 the size of the International Space Station in a very special orbit around the moon. So it will be able to see constantly the southern portions of the lunar surface. Next slide. The interesting thing about NASA's plans for the future is that it's not planning to replace the International Space Station, but instead support private space stations in operation. They have signed an agreement under a NASA Space Act agreement for Axiom Space to build a module and deploy it perhaps in 2024, 2025, add modules to it. And then when the International Space Station is deorbited, this will become an independent private space station that NASA will provide funding for, but it's supposed to be developing its own source of revenues from private space station or private astronauts going up and other services. Next slide. Currently, NASA is trying to define a second private space station with Space Reef by Blue Origin and many partners. Starlab, which involves Nanoracks, Lockheed Martin, and many other partners, and then the Northrop Grumman and partners define a design that NASA will pick to create an agreement for the second private space station. So this is a new era in space, and NASA is embracing private enterprise in many new ways. And interesting thing is that one of these private space stations envisions an inflatable system that could be used as a studio for making movies and entertainment in space. So again, a whole new age we see coming for the future. But now let's go to the next slide. All of these developments have created remarkable advances, but also created new problems of space safety and sustainability. And that's what our organization, the Alliance for Collaboration in the Exploration of Space, which we call ACES Worldwide, is trying to address. So we see these many new issues of space safety standards and certification, the need for new regulations, Astral law, as Michelle has just talked to us about, and other ways, innovative ways for us to address cosmic hazards that we heard from in Jan Wermer's address, which I will go into a little bit further. So I'm just going to talk about 3 examples of initiatives that we are trying to advance to help the future of space exploration and development. So next slide. So we've heard often about space debris. You can see in these series of images on the left how space debris has developed when it was first discussed by Don Kessler, who came up with the idea that we call the Kessler syndrome, where there could be runaway space debris. You can see how it has increased year after year. And you can see on the image of how dense, when we have a very small scale version of space, how it's so dense around low Earth orbit, and increasingly so. So we are hoping in many ways that we can develop a new space law and new ways to engage in active debris removal and eventually evolve to space traffic management systems. So this is a very key aspect of what we think is an important way to preserve access to space and to create new ways to mitigate the formation of debris in the first place, and also to engage in not only active debris removal, but reutilization of debris in new ways so that we can efficiently use debris in new and innovative ways. So that's one initiative. Next slide. Cosmic hazards. Again, we heard quite a bit about these issues. I think that asteroids are talked about the most, but frankly, I believe that solar flares, particularly in terms of what are called coronal mass ejections, where we're talking about mass hitting the Earth. As you can see in the top center slide, this is a coronal mass ejection. And as you can see that the Van Allen belts, which usually are symmetrical around Earth, are being smashed inward, and that the other elements of the Van Allen belts are being pushed 30, 40 Earth diameters out into space. And this can create huge problems in terms of electromagnetic grids. There was a study done by Lloyd's of London, which suggested that a Carrington event like occurred in 1859 could create trillions of dollars of damage to transformers all over the world. One of our initiatives is to try to get governments to invest probably only a few $100 million to re-equip all of the transformers of the world with capacitors so that they could be protected against a huge solar storm. These solar storms, massive ones, seem to come 150 years apart, and we're now almost 160 years since the Carrington event. So time is not on our side. Really interesting aspect about defense is one aspect, but the other thing is new opportunities. The, if you will, the chief scientist of NASA, Jim Green, a friend of mine, he's come up with the idea of an electromagnetic shield that could be used to divert coronal mass ejections. And this one is not for Earth, but for Mars. And the idea is that Mars, which has no iron core, has no natural electromagnetic defense system. But if we could create an artificial system out in space, that Mars could develop its own atmosphere. So I think this is one of the really exciting ideas that space agencies of the world could consider creating an electromagnetic shield for Mars so that we could actually develop an atmosphere on the red planet. So anyway, these are one of our top areas of initiative, and we really do hope we can convince countries of the world to put capacitors onto satellites and onto transformers to protect us against the next huge solar event that occurs. In 1859, when the Carrington Event occurred, the Northern Lights came down to Cuba and Hawaii and could be even seen from the equator. And telegraph offices caught on fire. And that was the only electrical utility in operation. But today, everything from the internet to our electrical grid systems, our pipelines, are all vulnerable to a massive solar event. So again, we're working in this area. And finally, next slide. Next slide. Here are some of the things that we're doing in terms of space safety certification, the issues of a private space safety institute that can certify the safety of private space stations, the need for education and training, operational standards, mutual aid agreements, and even safety systems for deep space habitats. We think these are all important initiatives, and again, it's one of our prime areas of activities. My colleague, the president of ACES Worldwide, Jim Crisafullah, will be speaking later to explain some of the other things that we're doing, our international global advisory committee from around the world, from more than 15 countries are involved with our activities, and we hope you can join us. So final slide. Please join us. This is our website. You can contact me at joepelton@verizon.net or Jim Crisafullah, who will be speaking in about 2 hours, at crisafullah.jim@gmail.com. We hope you will find what we're doing interesting and exciting and join this all-volunteer organization. We currently have alliance members with a strong alliance agreement with SRI, but over a dozen other organizations around the world are part of our alliance, and we hope when we develop our action agenda papers that we can coordinate them with the alliance members so that we can make an even larger impact on the world community. So very happy to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you very much, Joe. So I have a book here standing for you.
Great.
The observatory, and okay, next time I see you and when you come here. So is there any question for Joe after this very nice overview of key milestone for space exploration, but also how we need to preserve the safety of this space asset for our society? Any question? Yes, please. Yes, I'm going to. No, this one doesn't work so well. So we have our running astronaut. It does sometimes, but it's intermittent. But okay.
I have a question about the increasing amount of satellites in the space. That I did quick research about the satellite numbers. That at the moment, US has the largest number of satellites of over 4,700 and over 2,500 are Starlink satellites. And I read an article on Fortune, and the article was from February this month, and it says that they have they are targeting a total number of 30,000 satellites as a goal. And I also read that NASA has already complained about this, and also China filed a complaint to UN about a possible collision between one of the Starlink satellite and the space station. And what's your opinion on this? Should we have some regulations about private companies sending so many satellites into the space, and which could actually compromise different states putting research satellites into space? Thank you.
Could you summarize the question,
Yes,
Bernard?
Yes, about the question about the impact of this constellation of satellite, and whether, because they represent a danger, in particular for space station, other assets, but how can we regulate to limit or to control possible impact, collision, for instance, with such a satellite?
Because there's currently only SpaceX.
No, there are many.
Starlink is doing this, but
Yeah, but there are many.
there are other companies who start to do this and send.
Well,
There are many constellations in the making. Actually, we have overall IF committee on traffic management that is looking at the impact of this constellation. So, but I'll let Joe answer what we should do.
right. Well, the problem is we don't have effective international regulations at this point. The ITU, which grants the frequencies for these systems, there are certain requirements about how you file the information and make progress to launch these satellites, but they have no control over saying you can or cannot launch these satellites. They just regulate the frequency allocations. There is each country government that reviews the applications and so on. But again, the regulatory agencies and the governments have no particular provision to limit the number of the satellites that are launched. So that's what space traffic management concepts and controls are all about, of trying to create ways to, first of all, regulate the deorbit of satellites. There are many proposals for fees that should be imposed, and that if you create debris or are not able to bring it, John Wormer in his presentation noted such a kind of a fee structure to pay for the orbit of satellites. But to me, until we get agreement on space traffic control and management systems, that we are going to have this runaway debris problem, and that the US has led in terms of launching these very large scale constellations. But as I mentioned, China and a number of other countries have now filed for these types of large scale constellations as well. And so to me, we almost need some sort of a moratorium on new systems until we could get a good space traffic control system into place. And this is a very urgent issue, because if we do go into the Kessler syndrome and there is a runaway creation of debris, we really are in very serious situations. People are aware that we track about 20,000 pieces of orbital debris today that are the size of a baseball, but there are 500,000 of debris elements that are the size of a large-scale marble, and even that can crack the window of a shuttle or a spacecraft, and because traveling at 17,000 miles per hour or more than 25,000 kilometers an hour. They have the force of a grenade. So we have created this very dangerous environment that's growing steadily worse. And to me, space traffic management agreement internationally is one of the very top safety issues we could consider today.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, a short one from Seth.
Just very quickly.
Yeah.
When Don Kessler came up with his Kessler syndrome, there was a little bit of discussion inside the Beltway in DC about essentially instituting a tax on any launch for space cleanup, or maybe additional, positioning jets so that when a satellite died, it would be either kicked up or down, so that it was no longer contributing to the space debris problem. Whatever happened to that?
Well, it's never been agreed, and there was this UN copious committee on the long-term sustainability of space that tried to get agreement on space traffic control measures, but this was not agreed, particularly by Russia, and so this is one of the agreements that never got adopted. I've myself proposed the idea that we have a safety insurance policy, that people, when they launch satellites, they buy launch insurance, which is usually 15% or more of the cost of a mission. I proposed that a system that's called space debris insurance that could be 5% of a mission requirement, with a refund if you deorbit your satellite and you don't create debris. So I have a very detailed outline on that. But again, this has no immediate opportunity to be accepted. But I do hope that the ongoing UN efforts on the long-term sustainability of space will try to come up with space traffic control and management concepts.
But an immediate action has been taken by a country, I would name after, which ensure that any launch from its territory must include the deorbiting facility. And I'm proud to say that this is France. France, all launches from France territory must include the deorbiting system now. So I think this could be a good model for other countries which are launch countries. So there are not so many of those. They could follow this example. And then there will be new countries with launch facilities that will just follow this practice. So
there's a proposal from Italy for a deorbit capability that would be put on each satellite, and they could do this at fairly low cost. But again, the commercial operators are not willing to agree to do this.
Yeah, but France as a territory has it as a law, but it's good to have some commercial operators that provide the service. And so now you just have to buy some easy Italian deorbit system. So I think that we have to work from the various angles. So thank you very much, Joe. We are just exactly on time for our coffee break. So we salute you, and we are going to reconvene as planned at 16:10. Central European summertime, and we have seen Jim Crisafulli has joined us as well, and you are speaking in 1 hour from now, and so it's nice to. Okay, so we'll have a talk on space settlement, and then we have also Dr. Uli Köhler with us from DLR. We have a talk on Mars Society, and then about the ISS Worldwide International Program. And so for some of you that will stay, we will also at the end of this talk gather some of you on stage and have a kind of a wrap up for our session. But first we go for a coffee break. Thank you. Okay, so if you could change the battery for this one, and this one I try to save the battery. This one seems good, so I saved the battery for the So, yes, James project, we have to check that is. Okay. Hello, Mars Society, do you read me? Ah.
Hello.
Hello.
Excuse me, I'm looking for my break. Have you seen that?
Black umbrella. We look. Okay, we check. Yeah, so, okay, so next. Okay, so it's our pleasure to have with us Jim Burke from the Mars Society. So he's now the executive director. And we have known him for a long time for his achievement in promoting the exploration of Mars. And he's now going to describe in particular Mars settlements and also showing life in those Mars settlements in virtual reality. Jim, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Guten Tag, everyone. It's good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm calling you here from Seattle, Washington in the United States. It's early morning here, and I'm really pleased and thrilled to be participating with this event. Bernard and Adriano and the team at the Space Renaissance are great partners of ours at the Mars Society, and we're very thankful to be part of what you guys are doing. So I'd like to talk to you today a bit about the programs we have at the Mars Society, and basically what we are trying to get accomplished. Let me kind of share my screen here. I've got some slides I'll pull up.
Do you have your present? Okay.
Good.
Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So basically, the Mars Society, we started almost 25 years ago, and we've been planting the flag of Mars wherever we can. We started a set of research stations in the year 2000. The first one was built in Canada in the Arctic. It's called the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station, and we built this facility in a Mars analog environment that NASA had been going to for several years. And it would be a way for us to show the world that preparing for Mars can be done on Earth using an analog approach. And so this was the first station that we built. We also built one in Utah in the United States in the year 2002. And that's the Mars Desert Research Station. So that's the second one there, the middle one. And that one's been extremely successful. We've had 280 crews so far go through that facility. And we just finished our most recent field season. Our field seasons run from October through May. And we've had, I'd say, over 1,500 individual crew members go through that facility, and 2 of which have now reached space. Jessica Watkins is a NASA astronaut who's currently on the International Space Station, and she was a graduate of our program in the early days. And also Cyan Proctor was a graduate of our program, served on a crew. So we really feel like we got the ball rolling with analog research, and we want to continue that leadership role. And so we've been talking recently with some folks in Australia. They've had a plan for several years for a station there. They just haven't had the funding or the support to execute that project. And so with some of the recent donations we've gotten in the last couple of years, we got a $1 million donation from Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin company, the Club for the Future, a nonprofit that they run. And that has allowed us to pledge some support to the Australians for them to build their station. And their station is going to be located in Arkaroola in southern Australia, which is a really interesting place because it's one of the few places on Earth that you can find stromatolites. And stromatolites are some of the oldest fossils on Earth. They're actually fossilized cyanobacteria, so some of the earliest life forms on Earth. And so this is the exact thing that you would look for on Mars. You know, we would look for stromatolites. We'd look for pieces of Mars's early crust and fossils that of cyanobacteria. That would be a great sign of past life on Mars. And so by doing these analog stations, we're demonstrating that you can accomplish a lot with humans by exploring Mars. You can, you can have a plan of exploration and execute it, and you can have people working together in an analog, in a remote, isolated environment, and work together successfully and accomplish things. And so that's really what we want to demonstrate with our stations. And I believe we've been very successful doing that so far. There's quite a community around the world now of analog research and analog astronaut programs. And so we're excited that we got the ball rolling there, and we want to continue that leadership role and bring more opportunities for people to stay at a station like these. So that's definitely an area that we're focused on. Some of the other programs we work on, we just had our University Rover Challenge competition, which we hold in Utah, and that was very successful. It was the first time we'd done it since COVID, so it was the first time in 3 years we got all the teams together in Utah. And we had a 4-day event, and it went great. There was a lot of fantastic engineering work done by the teams that built rovers, and they competed in a variety of challenges. And it was really great to see. I actually got to judge part of the competition myself for the first time, and it was a really positive experience meeting all those students from around the world that participated. Also, for the last couple years, as Bernard just mentioned, we've been working on a virtual reality project. And I'm really excited about this because it's coming along really well, and it's available for people to try out now. And we've shown it at quite a few events in the US so far. So what we've done with the VR project is we wanted to create an environment that would be easy for people to experience walking around on Mars. So like at a museum or at a booth, and people can walk up and not know anything about Mars, not know anything about the Mars Society, but have a few minutes of getting to walk on Mars and learning about what it would be about the near future, having that type of experience. That was really important from a public outreach perspective for us, but also to tell the story of what we do at these stations. And so what we've created with the VR project so far, and we want to do more, is we've created a digital twin of our station in Utah. It's in very high fidelity. You can put on a VR headset and walk around inside the station, pick things up. You can learn about the layout of the station, the different buildings, and where equipment is, and where how to do things like fill the water tanks and find sample containers, and go outside, collect samples, bring it back inside. So some of the same crew training that we have to give people in real life in Utah, you can actually do in VR at home or in the comfort of wherever you are. And so it's not only a public outreach tool, but it's also a great training tool for our analog astronauts, people that are going to be part of our station program in Utah. And so we also were, in addition to making a digital twin of the campus in Utah, we also scan the terrain. Now, this is a really hard engineering problem, to take a real life set of terrain on a large scale, like a square kilometer, and put it into VR and have it be as good fidelity as you would expect for someone like a geologist to walk around and plan out where they want to explore in real life. And that's the goal, is we want to allow our scientific crew members to actually prepare for the mission using the VR as a tool. So we did a couple things. We flew a fixed wing drone to capture the square mile of terrain around the station in Utah. We also did some work to capture the terrain using LiDAR, like a laser finding rangefinder, and that creates a that you can actually overlay onto the photos of the terrain, and then you have a 3D version of the terrain. So we've done all that work, and it's in the VR app now, but we'd like to do more. We'd like to essentially scan larger areas of the terrain out in Utah. There's some really interesting features, like there's a canyon system, and there's some other really interesting geologic features. We want to make sure that there's a lot of different options to go travel and walk around and drive a rover around in the VR app. And so we're in the course now of putting together more terrain and a better process, really, for capturing that terrain on a large scale. And this is really cutting edge stuff. There's not a lot of experience in the VR industry of what we're doing. And one person told me it's the biggest VR app they'd ever seen, because we have a square mile that you can walk around in, and that's really uncommon in VR. So it's an exciting program. What we'd also like to do long term, a couple of years back, we had a Mars colony contest, a Mars colony design contest. And so we had a bunch of people design different permanent bases on Mars. We also had a city-state contest a year later. But a lot of those designs, people made 3D versions of them, 3D renderings of them. And wouldn't it be great to have some of that in VR? Another thing we want to do is we want to demonstrate an astronaut out on EVA working in VR with someone. So imagine if someone's in the habitat and there's a crew out on EVA, they can have a real-time link, and the person in the habitat in VR could actually see where they are in the VR environment and direct them to go look at things. So we're working to have a real-time communications link as well as a real-time data link. And we're using the radio spectrum as a demonstration for that. So that's work we're doing right now. We hope to demonstrate that soon at the station in Utah, to have a real-time VR field session with an astronaut out on EVA working closely with someone in VR in real time. And finally, one of the things we'd like to do is expand our education and outreach programs. And we're actually doing a high school summer program right now this week that we just started, and it's called the Mission to Mars Design Class. And so we have several students taking through this. We have a set of A-list lecturers, folks that work at NASA, industry. Robert spoke, people like Homer Hickam, and a lot of the folks that come to our conference, actually we signed up to be guest lecturers for this. And the students are benefiting all of their knowledge about Mars mission design. So different aspects. If you were going to design a mission to Mars, what are some of the things you have to take into account? And so as we go through these lectures, the students are learning different perspectives, different aspects of Mars, and they're going to work together to create a Mars mission, a surface landing activity, and then we'll have them judged in the competition. And so this is a great 6-week program for high schoolers. We hope to do things like this more in the future. We hope this is the first of many. And so, education and outreach is definitely a huge part of what we do, and we want to expand that. So with that, I will see if you guys have any questions. I'm happy to take those.
Thank you very much, Jim. Bravo. Okay, so I have to say that also I want to really compliment the Mars Society and founders, but also all those that have been working in the team. And in my case, it has been a transforming experience as well. In 2009, we brought a team from ESA and also a number of academics for dedicated research in collaboration with NASA Ames Research Center and with Jet Propulsion Lab. And that's the moment actually when we have started our Euro-Moon Mars program, very much inspired by what you have done with the Mars Society in the US and internationally now. And we had every year a number of crew astronauts that we sent to the Utah Mars Desert Research Station. And actually this year, if some of you are interested in the audience, so we have some of our young professionals here that are astronauts in the training. So we are willing also to co-sponsor some Europeans in particular that would want to go to the Mars Desert Research Station to conduct research testing instruments that we have. And so, and we would like very much, also we have been working now on project of building an habitat in Europe where we could also train some of the, some students from various universities as a first step. So we are looking at some concept very inspired by those that we have developed for Flashline of MDRS, also the base that we have ICs in the Mauna Kea. So any question from the audience? Who is volunteer to go to Mars Desert Research Station? Any astronauts? Some of those that we have trained, we have locked some of them 1 week in a moon base. So maybe that your next step would be to go to Mars. No more question. So actually, are there some near-term project in the short term that of extending also some of the stations that you have mentioned to other countries or continents?
Yeah, I mentioned we're working with our Australian chapter
and in Europe,
develop a station there. So for Europe, I know that we have a chapter in Poland, and there is a habitat that they are part of. And I know there's also in Iceland, there's one. I know that's not Europe, but there's a couple, existing projects that we're not affiliated with officially, but certainly our members are participating in. And also I have a crew mission coming to MDRS next year, and several of my crew members are from our French chapter, and they're I know a couple of them were part of the Amity analog program, which I believe was in the Israeli desert. So yeah, there's definitely a few things happening in Europe right now that are related to analog research, and so our chapters are plugged into some of those.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we have the pleasure to have with us the founder of the Mars Society, Dr. Robert Zubrin, who had this vision also to build Mars Direct, and now has also a broad vision, and that's the title of his talk, Developing the Solar System, a task for today, not for the future. And so it's a pleasure, Robert, to have you and to present your vision and your talk. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I actually want to build on Jim's talk. And I know I've showed up late, so how much time do I have?
Yeah, okay, 15 minutes is good so that we have time for question. Is that okay for you?
Yeah, that'll be fine. That's excellent.
Yeah.
If people want to, get acquainted with my vision for exploring and settling Mars and the solar system and going beyond, I've got several books, most notably The Case for Mars and The Case for Space. But in this talk, okay, I'm actually going to focus on our analog work. And I believe that this kind of work is the most critical thing to enable a capable Humans to Mars program. The NASA Humans to Mars mission planning, such as it is deeply defective because, and the root cause of that is that they are thinking about missions to Mars as an aviation issue. That is, it's about the flight. They are not thinking about Mars. They are not thinking about what we do when we are on Mars, which is the entire point of the mission, okay? And To a certain extent, this is a heritage of the Apollo program, which was certainly not about what we do when we were on the moon. It was about getting to the moon and getting back. And even, you know, the excellent movie Apollo 13 is about surviving the flight. And even the movie The Martian is about surviving the mission. You know, I like the movie The Martian, but it is defective. And the reason why it is defective is that the character played by Matt Damon is not interested in Mars at all. He's not interested in the search for life on Mars. He's not interested in the human future on Mars. And these are the fundamental issues. These are why we need to go. This is why it is worth doing this. Matt Damon, since all he wanted to do was get back to Earth, should never have left. And in fact, in real life, he hasn't. But what we need to be thinking about is what we are going to do on Mars and what we are going to create on Mars. Okay, this is where the focus needs to be. And the Mars Society's Analog Research Station program has been sometimes been compared to mission simulations done, for instance, at the Moscow Institute for Biomedical Studies, where they put people in a habitat for 500 days and tasked them with doing nothing. And they became bored, and you would have psychological and social issues resulting from extreme boredom. Now, but that has nothing to do with the real point of a Mars mission, because the point of a Mars mission is not isolation. The point of early Mars missions will be exploration, and later Mars missions will be development, okay? And so the first stage in this is exploration. Okay, that's what the first phase of human activity on Mars is going to be about. Exploration for the sake of science and exploration for the purpose of preparing development, prospecting for resources, identifying the most favorable sites, testing out resource extraction or creation techniques. So therefore, the kind of HABs that we have, or the kind of program we have, cannot be done in a simulated habitat inside of a hangar at Johnson Space Center. Now, I'm not discounting the use of such things for engineering simulations, for instance, water recycling systems or this kind of thing. But what we're interested in focusing on is the operational simulation. And this requires having a theater of operations that is at least somewhat comparable in scope for its activities as would be embraced on an actual human mission to Mars. The human mission to Mars is not interested, or shouldn't be interested, in restricting its activities to exploring an area the size of a parking lot around the lander. A human mission to Mars should be interested in exploring a region of Mars comparable in size, say, to France, or at least Belgium. That is, to actually, I mean, Mars is a big place. It's much bigger than France. You would have to do many, many missions to Mars in order to explore the whole planet if each mission only had a region of exploration comparable in size to France, let alone one comparable in size to Monaco. And so you need a theater of operation. This is why both of the Mars Society's current stations are located in deserts of considerable extent. The polar desert at the Flashline Research Station in northern Canada, which is on an uninhabited island the size of Ireland, and the Mars Desert Research Station, which is in the Utah desert, which is somewhat extensive, but the actual uninhabited area available to us is perhaps 100 square kilometers, about 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers. After that, you get into settled places. Now, we are currently looking at establishing 2 more stations. One in the Australian desert, in a region I think it's called, and you'll have to forgive my Australian Arcacula, and the other in the Gobi Desert, where I just returned from. I was there last week. And the Australian desert is extremely interesting because the fossils of the oldest forms of life on Earth are there. There are fossils of bacterial stromatolites in the Australian desert that date back 3.5 billion years. And this was in the period when Mars and Earth were twins. They were both warm and wet planets. And so if we're going to look for proof of past life on Mars, if we're looking for fossils, this is the sort of fossils we might reasonably expect to find. Okay, we're not going to find dinosaur bones on Mars. We have found dinosaur bones in the Utah desert, and I must say we found them under simulated mission conditions. And when that find was followed up by professional paleontologists, it has led to the largest discovery of dinosaur fossils in North America in half a century. And I should add that that find could not have been done by a robotic rover, because I was there the day it happened, and I happen to know we had to climb down a 2-meter drop to get into this little canyon, and then exploring the canyon. None of this would have been accessible to robotic rovers, nor would it have found it even if it had landed in the canyon, just because of the kind of activity and intuition required to ferret the thing out. But so the Australian outback is a place where people can practice looking for exactly the kind of thing that we need to look for on Mars. Okay. Now, the Mongolian Desert is different. It's extremely fossiliferous. It is famous for its for its dinosaur fossils. And in fact, the Mongolians have some anger at the number of their fossils that have been looted by fossil hunters from developed countries, kind of like the Greeks not being pleased with the removal of some of the best statues from the Parthenon by the British. But nevertheless, even with whatever's been removed, it remains enormously interesting geologically and paleontology and so forth. But what is also extremely interesting about the Gobi, for the point of view of Mars mission operations, is its size. Because there you do have a desert the size of France. And with not just one kind of geology, but many kinds, mostly sedimentary geology, but of different kinds and radically different topographies, as is certainly also the case on Mars. And see, what we need to do on Mars, if we're going to have a productive Mars mission, is develop a science of combined operations and telescience to master this. For example, one of the regions where I was taken, the erosion had created literally a labyrinth, a maze of channels in the terrain, and it was questionable how far one could penetrate into this wonderland of erosion features on, say, an all-terrain vehicle. Certainly couldn't get anywhere on a pressurized rover-sized vehicle, but an all-terrain vehicle might be able to get somewhere, but it would have to thread its way through the maze. And in order to do this, you would have to do combined operations involving using satellite remote sensing data, aerial drones, which of course we now know we can use on Mars. The Ingenuity helicopter has proven the viability of that. Pedestrian astronauts, astronauts on all-terrain vehicles, astronauts in a science lab at the Hab on Mars, and a remote science and engineering team on Earth, all working together as an integrated system. And the integration of effective integration of the much larger scientific capabilities that will remain on Earth with the mission as the point of a spear requires developing an art of telescience, analogous to telemedicine. I think everyone has heard about the concept of telemedicine, which to some extent has become a reality with the advent of the internet, where a general practitioner, country doctor up in Alaska somewhere who has to do a heart transplant can be guided to it by a team of specialists at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City through the internet connection. Well, we're going to have to develop an art of telescience that operates in the same way, because the crew on Mars is going to be small. Maybe 5 or 6 people, maybe 1 or 2 scientists in it. So you have a geologist, and that person, he or she, will probably be, as it were, a general practitioner field geologist. Okay, but on Earth, we could have paleontologists, mineralogists, geomorphologists, etc. There's a whole range of geological specialties to back that person up in his or her investigations and make them much more fruitful. That is not the way field exploration is done on Earth today. Field exploration on Earth is typically done by somebody going out in the field in the summer with a couple of grad students and, doing some rock collecting and then coming back to the university and working it up over the next 6 months and then submitting a paper to a journal, and it gets published a year after that. That's certainly not how we're going to explore on Mars. There's going to be real-time collaboration and development of results and preliminary results and follow-up investigations going on as they are there. And this art of combined operations, combining the merits of satellite data, aerial robots, pedestrian and motorized astronauts, field lab, and team back home, and possibly also wheeled rovers and things of that sort on Mars, analogous to the military art of combined operations, where they combined the capabilities of infantry, armor, aircraft, helicopters, artillery, blah, blah, to create the best possible effect. That's what has to be developed. It requires field work to do it. I might also add, since Mongolia is probably not familiar to most people, I certainly was not. I had never been to Mongolia. I had never even knew anyone who had been to Mongolia. That this is a country that is looking very much to enter the modern world. There's a lot of extremely intelligent people. They're incredibly hospitable people, and there's a lot of support there for making Mongolia a place where the world space programs can come and develop their capabilities together with Mongolian talent. I actually met with several government ministers and the Prime Minister of Mongolia while I was there, and they all support this project. And I might also say that the Mongolian Mars Society chapter, which is known as Mars V, is actually very large. It has some 3,000 members, including 120 very active members. And they have developed a concept, which I find interesting, which really, you might say, invokes the nomad heritage that they have, which is not to build a permanent station at one point and use it to try to explore the Gobi, but to create a portable station. And next year, and they're actually planning on initiating operations next May, for about a 2-month field season in a region called the Mid-Gobi, which is where I visited, where they will explore there, and then perhaps the year later go to the South Gobi or other locations. They've identified 20 extremely interesting locations with widely varying topography, geology, mineralogy, etc. And this could go into all kinds of places and learn how to do widely ranging field operations in many different places. And I should add one more thing about this. Mongolia is a free country, but it is not aligned. Okay. And so in addition to people from the West being able to go to Mongolia, people from Russia and people from China can go to Mongolia. So it remains in our divided world one of the few places where potentially investigators from the opposing blocks can come together and perhaps find a way to work together. So I'll leave it there and take questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, indeed, Mongolia as a crossroads for countries, and space also be a crossroads where we can connect from a different political system, different blocks. So, any question for Robert Zubrin? So, can you give him a? So we have one for Bernard Handel.
Thank you. I think I have a crucial question. Moon as well as Mars have much lower gravity than Earth. Are there any countermeasures against the effect of lower gravity on these planets?
Yeah, countermeasure to the 1/3 G or 1/6 of Mars, 1/6 for the Moon.
Okay. Well, I think this is an interesting question. Obviously, we can't do that at the analog stations that we have because they all have 1G gravity. But I think the time is long overdue to start investigating the health effects of partial gravity on astronauts. I think that, I mean, look, we have now spent 60 years investigating the effects of zero gravity on astronauts. And we've learned a lot about zero G. The main thing we've learned about zero G is that you'd be better off avoiding it as a condition for space travel if you want to do any serious exploration when you arrive, because it does decondition you, although it is survivable. But if we're going to develop Mars or the Moon, we're going to be working in 1/3 or 1/6 gravity. And the question is, what are the long-term health effects of that? And then what would be the countermeasures? Now, some 20 years ago, the Mars Society proposed a mission which we called the Translife mission, which would be to put a capsule in Earth orbit that would spin, and in it you would have a crew of mice, and at the perimeter habitat you could have 1/3 gravity, and halfway out you'd have 1/6 gravity, and you could see both how mammals born and raised on Earth would fare under such conditions, as well as their children born, gestated and born and then grown in the partial gravity. And actually this mission concept was one of the things that we initially discussed with Elon Musk when he came around around 2001, although he then went on after seeing to launch it was he even had to put up with ridiculous Russian swindlers of buying a launch vehicle from them or ridiculous prices from Western. He said, well, what we need is a launch company, SpaceX. But but anyway, this mission and missions like it have never been done. Every once in a while, some maverick group at NASA or at Ames or someplace like this comes up with a similar concept, and they get shot down because of the monopoly on the space medicine program of zero gravity health effects researchers. And this is inappropriate. We need to be doing missions like this. And actually, and then of course, with people, and one use I can think of for the Orion spacecraft, I think the Orion actually is very overweight to use on lunar missions. It is a defect to have to send such a large capsule all the way to the moon when a Dragon or similar smaller capsule would do the job. But it can easily be launched to Earth orbit. And then if tethered off of the stage that delivered it to Earth orbit, the assembly could be rotated and you could create a temporary artificial gravity space station with its own bailout system, namely cut the tether and land the Orion. In this way, we could learn about the effects of 1/3 gravity on humans. I will add one final point that I once asked Buzz Aldrin, who of course has experienced Earth gravity, moon gravity, and zero gravity. When he was on the moon, did it feel more like 1 gravity or 0 gravity? And he said it felt more like 1 gravity.
Actually, my plan is for us to retire on the moon in 20 years. And I'm happy to live on 1/6 gravity. Eventually, that I will be able to beat some Olympic records of heights, of jumping. And I hope to host the first Olympic Games on the moon. Okay, now we have a question from Uli. Uli Köhler.
I'm Uli Köhler from the DLR's Institute of Planetary Research. Let me first emphasize my appreciation that you say if we go to Mars, we should have a plan to do something meaningful up there. And we all know that the Apollo program profited so much from having this geological program that Gene Shoemaker and colleagues made possible there. My question is rather, do you have a time horizon for these things that are coming from Mars? And the more realistic time horizon, and the wishful thinking that's going on. Will we be able to use the 2033 and 48 launch windows for putting people on Mars?
Okay, so I didn't hear all the question, but I believe it was, what do I think is the realistic time horizon for human missions to Mars? Well, you know, things happen because people make them happen. I have here somewhere in my office a copy of Popular Science from 1958. And it has a visionary article of how we will go to the moon in the year 2000. Okay, so this is Popular Science. This is for science fans, and it's after Sputnik. And so now they're talking about going to the moon in 42 years. Now, in fact, we were on the moon 11 years later. The editors of Popular Science, however, could not imagine that as a realistic possibility. But conditions change, things happen. Sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen. We've had a lot of that recently. But there can be good surprises as well as bad surprises. I believe that you know, by 2024, starships will be traveling to orbit on an operational basis. And if that is the reality of the year 2024, that there's reusable heavy lift vehicles with 100-ton capability to orbit and 1% the launch cost of a Saturn V, if this is the reality that we're living in at that point, okay, this will change the political calculus massively. Okay, now, of course, this could be aborted if, for instance, we're in the middle of a world war or other things that are out there as possibilities. But assuming that the world is more or less at peace, and this is the reality that we're in, you know, we're going to have election in this country in 2024. If this is the reality, I think whoever is elected is going to turn to his or her advisors and say, look, here's this guy who wants to go to Mars and he's got these ships that need some other stuff to make this plan work. He needs systems for making propellant on Mars. He needs power systems to run them. He needs Mars spacesuits and vehicles. We could do that. If we got together with him, could we be on Mars by the end of my second term? And the answer to that will be yes. Well, is it going to cost $1 trillion? No, it could probably be done within NASA's existing budget because the primary flight system is already developed. Well, then why aren't we doing it? In other words, by making the mission practical, Musk is going to make it sellable. Okay, now, once again, that's not a certainty. Musk skates close to the edge of the ice. He could fall off. But this is the way things are going. Now, if Musk does fall off the edge of the ice, there'll be another Musk because he has proven a point, which is that it is possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that in 1/10 the time at 1/3 the cost that were previously thought necessary by the mainstream space programs. And if he should fail, others are going to pick up this banner because he's proven that it can happen. And so it will happen. So if things stay, if the world stays at peace and if Musk doesn't fall off the ice, yeah, we'll be on Mars by 2030, maybe 2033 kind of timescale. If the world is diverted into another track, it could take longer, but it's going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Robert. We have got a very interesting question from, I think we are out of question, but make a short one. We have got one from Rocket. Is what can Europe contribute to the human Mars exploration program? But I propose we answer this question during the panel at the end, because we'll have several voices on that. So do you have an urgent one, Adriano? Very fast.
Yes. Okay. I know that we are maybe running out of time, but I think I have an important consideration to do because when you say, Bob, you said at the beginning that the Mars mission should not be an insulated thing, but it should be part of a strategy. Should be part, in my opinion, of an expansion strategy. We will have fully reusable vehicles producing fuel in space, developing the moon, and systematically exploring Mars and put first settlements also there. So this is very important to have a strategy, a global strategy to expand into space. And I also made a criticism of that movie, The Martian, when it went out. And I have to remark that the movie is slightly different from the book.
Yeah, and the question is?
I don't have a question.
So it was over. But let's use the.
It was just a consideration.
But let's speak brain.
I am happy to see that since our focus is complementary.
Yes, we are converging.
Yes, we are going to agree on the fact that we need a strategy, that this is the point, and we should work to build it. Okay.
Yeah, so Mars Society, Space Renaissance, we are ready to do some work together, but we need also some actors. So some of these analog tests in various parts are very relevant to learn what we are going to do, including science and technology, exploration, space renaissance. So thank you very much, Robert. If you are still with us when we are gathering the speakers for the panel, you are welcome. But now, for the sake of the program, I'd like to invite Dr. Uli Köhler to give his talk on DLR planetary highlights. So Uli Köhler is a long-term planetary colleague. Actually, we were together co-investigator of the Mars Express high-resolution camera that has delivered beautiful, not only images, but also scientific results. But he has been also involved in a number of other planetary missions, so give us even a perspective in the whole solar system. So you are using your own, or you have transferred your own?
I have transferred it.
Okay, so
I should have it, right?
No, he has not trust. He has it on his computer.
Okay. So I give you the.
Yeah.
Now, what happened? What will happen? You come in trouble with that?
Good.
Which mic? Do I have a hand mic or?
Yeah, you can use this one, and we have this mic. This.
You are connected to the Zoom or not? No, you should, otherwise we cannot share it. Okay, so what does it mean? I mean, I can give you the link via email. I sent it to you.
But otherwise,
I have no web connection.
Is it a small presentation or is it big?
No, it's rather big.
Yeah. Or we can just show the screen on the. Yeah, we can show it. We can show this. Okay.
It's 330.
And I'm sure you have to reduce a lot of images to achieve this.
Yes, it's a picture book. It's not about all the fantastic achievements of planetary explorations. Also embedded in what does it mean for.
We don't see anything.
Yeah, that's because the Mac takes a couple of seconds. Now here we go. So you're ready, or?
I can't do anything.
We are based here in Berlin, so large German Space Center, and it's doing aerospace research, but also some energy transit, big data, all these things. We have 10,000 employees all over Germany at the moment. And the institute here in Berlin is a follow-up situation of the former East German Academy of Sciences, when they had an Institute of Cosmic Research doing planetary research for the Intercosmos project of the Soviet Union, and after the unification, it was particularly the wish of the German government to unite it with when we have been a department in South Germany at ELR's Munich or Oberpfaffenhofen site. And so that's how I came here, and we grew systematically. We are now the biggest planetary research institution in Europe. So what I want to tell you about a little bit is about the missions that we need to prepare for going into the solar system with people again. And I found this wonderful picture that demonstrates how far we have come in 75 years of spaceflight. You know, it's 57 was a good mix. So we're celebrating this first orbiter now for its 75 years. And it shows quite dramatically how well explored it seems, but it also is, the planets of the solar systems are, because they all have been visited by spacecraft in the meantime. And of course, the further distant the bodies are, the less visits they get. And this is in particular true for Uranus and Neptune, who have just been photographed by the Voyager 2 spacecraft. But Mars is a big target. Venus has been a big target. And Jupiter and its moons have been orbited and photographed and measured by a lot of spacecraft. And of course the Earth. And that's a very important point, that a lot of what we do, not all what we do, but a lot of what we do is important to reflect on what does it mean for planet Earth. You know, we do not know a lot of things of planet Earth, Earth's early times, because we have a dynamic planet, and so
most of what happened 3 to 4 billion years ago is hidden. So I cheer the rocket scientists of the world, what they are able to do now, because almost every body in the solar system, we can go there directly, the spacecraft, and observe it from orbit, from close by, from the ground even, and that's even true for the moons of the outer planets. That's true for the asteroids, which have been visited quite frequently in recent years. It's also true for comets. We've been with the space probe, the European space probe, on the comet Churyumov of Gerasimenko, as you know. And so the question is, of course, you spend a lot of money for this in text. This money, you should ask, what is it good for? What's all the effort is based on? And this is, by the way, the launch of the InSight mission in California in 2018. And you see the Los Angeles basin with all the lights, and the mission was going out to Earth orbit and then to Mars. So it's basic science, of course. We could talk 2 hours about this, but the basic question is, how did the solar system form 4.5 billion years ago? What happened? And how did the different bodies of the solar system evolve, and what does it mean for the earlier evolution of the Earth again? It has also a little bit to do with anxiety. I mentioned, I like this photograph that shows a couple in the US where a meteorite hit the roof and created this hole, and they don't look so shocked so much, but you also know that we had Tunguska, we had Chicxulub, we had the Nottingham and so on. And we know it will happen again, so this is also an important aspect of solar system exploration. And of course, we look into the future, what we have done with the last 2 talks with Mars Society, and how could we focus more on getting people to Mars and so on. Where could we go? Of course, this is also a question. It should not be Mars only. Where should we go for scientific reasons, and also for reason to put man's foot on other celestial bodies? And where can we go? Of course, this is limited. We have a lot of big wish list, but the wish list costs money, and you know from Christmas Eves that not all the wishes on the list have been fulfilled. And of course, we should maybe consider mostly what can we learn for our home base, for the planet Earth. And you see here these contrasting surfaces of the moon, which is a not really dead planetary body, but he had his best time behind him and had his volcanic activity almost close, and dynamic Earth with plate tectonics and a thick atmosphere. And what I think, which is the most exciting and not only scientifically important question, also, if you wish, philosophically or ethically and theologically, if you want, is the Gretchenfrage, as they call it in Germany, which is from Faust, Goethe's Faust. What is your way about religion? Pray. And I'm afraid that you're not really so deep in it as we think. And of course, this has to do with the question whether we are alone in the solar system, meaning are there other life forms? And if you extend it from solar system beyond the Milky Way, our galaxy, there's of course the question whether there are 200 to 300 billion stars, some Earth-like conditions which we should not consider today, but of course this is a highly interesting question since 1995, when we learned that other planets are also orbiting other stars. So this is just a list where DLR is participating in space missions. You see, I don't want to glorify this, it's just showing you that we're on the way in the inner solar system. We're visiting Mercury, we're visiting Venus, visiting Mars, and coming back to the moon a bit. And in the outer solar system, going to Jupiter soon. And in between the two, there's the asteroid belt, which is very important for many questions. regarding solar system exploration, and we're going there too, and I will show you briefly which missions these are, what they are doing. What we are doing at our institute is a fine thing that we can do almost everything from the idea of having a space experiment, a deep space experiment, up all the way down to archiving the data and everything in between. You see, we're doing modeling, we're doing mapping, we develop hardware, we're making experiments for survivability of organisms, we're doing field studies. Just at the moment, there's one important field study going on Mount Etna, and my roommate is already in Spitsbergen, and I'm doing Mars analog experiments there. We're doing mapping we're doing geology, all these things. And of course, we can do this because we're living here in a very privileged point in the solar system, a planet that's really in the best zone between the sun and the outer reaches, what we call the habitable zone. And of course, we want to know whether this habitable zone extended one time to Mars or even to Venus. And what does it mean that life developed here and how it developed here? We still do not precisely know how life came to Earth, and how conditions have been on Mars in a dynamic world that 4.2 billion to 3.5 billion years ago was quite wet and had similar conditions maybe that on early Earth. Just briefly, going back to Mercury with a wonderful mission called Bepi Colombo. Of course, the search for life is not so the first line on a Mercury mission. No, it's a mission jointly accomplished with JAXA, and it will arrive in 2025. What's more interesting maybe is having a look on our inner neighboring planet, which is Venus. And Venus is almost the size of the Earth. Venus is almost the same mass as the Earth. Venus might have had very similar starting conditions than Earth, maybe a little less volatile elements, but now I think it's quite common agreement that there might have been a time window of a couple 100 million years, the early time of Venus, where life could have been stable on the planet. Of course, we see no traces anymore because it's really a hot pot there. It's 460 degrees hot. But we want to find out more about Venus with new missions, Veritas, Da Vinci, and Vision. And we are participating with spectrometers on that mission. So we check whether there are really active volcanoes in Venus. And we really check into the upper atmosphere where there might be zones between 38 and 52 kilometers where the temperatures are moderate, where a little bit of water vapor is present, whether there are conditions that could stabilize life, primitive life forms, microorganisms. There was a discovery that was not really a discovery of phosphine, pH3, in a couple of years ago, and it's now, I think it's an agreement that it's a molecule that has no natural source on Earth. So there was the idea that it could have been from organisms, but the result is ambiguous. It's not really proven. So we're focused much more in these years, of course, on Mars. You have noticed all these missions that are going there. We've been comparing the two planets. Mars is about a third, half the diameter of the Earth, and it has much less mass, so it can hold an atmosphere on it, a dense atmosphere on it. So, and the major difference, of course, is that we have life here on Earth, and the question is whether this is true for Mars. True in the past, or even today. For that reason, we have performed, or a colleague of mine has performed experiments with primitive organisms from Earth in a Mars simulation chamber. And we know from extremophiles organisms on Earth, in the deserts and Antarctica and in extreme environments,
that they can stop to metabolize, but then start breathing again, so to say, when the condition is getting better. But these organisms, they survived 6 weeks in this Mars simulation chamber, and even had metabolism. So they repeated this experiment on the outside of the International Space Station, and they had the same results. These things are surviving, and we have a specialist here, who knows much more about this than a simple geologist, and it would be interesting to hear what this does mean for the history of Mars, what we have learned here from Earth in this really good experiments. So going to Mars, we see there are extremely many active missions going on. The oldest is Mars Odyssey 2001, and the European Mars Express is coming, which arrived in 2003 on Christmas. And you see also new players on the block. Tianwen 1 is a Chinese mission, and Amal from the United Arab Emirates in orbiter. And you see, of course, Perseverance, and you see also Mars, ExoMars Rosalind Franklin, which was cancelled for the moment due to the international conflicts, of course, because it was a joint mission with Roscosmos. Looking at Mars, we see from the previous mission that basically all is there that is needed to start life. You have carbon, you have hydrogen, you have oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur that already found out Curiosity, which is also 10 years now already on the planet. And this means, of course, we are looking for biosignatures that make use of these elements. And that's why they sent the next rover, the brother or sister rover of Curiosity, Perseverance, last year on Mars. And I just checked this morning, they already imaged 300,000 images in 1 year and 4 months. Incredible. It's really a wonder machine. Everything works fine. And it was placed in a crater named Jezero. And this crater was selected because you see a delta there, where sediments have been deployed. And there are a lot of interesting different geological settings that Perseverance will investigate now. It has basically 3 tasks. One is to check for geology. That's what geologists like to do, of course. And the second point is the crucial point, astrobiology. And it will look for biosignatures with different experiments and instrumentation. And what is also something really exciting is that it will sample the ground with drill holes about the size of a chalk in the school board. And the fourth, it's a plus. It's the check for the presence of humans on Mars, how this is possible, and whether you can make use of the carbon dioxide atmosphere to split off the oxygen to make breathable air for the astronauts to come in the decades to follow. So everything is going on that way. And the last 2 talks we had mentioned Stromatolites from Australia, and of course I show you them too. That's how they look like. It's these layers of mats of blue algae, and when jerked, they look really beautiful. And they still exist as living fossils, so to say, in the ocean of West Australia. You can see them too. So that's how these samples will be collected and stored, and they will be, of course, sealed, so that no atmospheric influences will alter them. And in a couple of years, probably towards the end of this decade, Fetch Rover will come to Mars to get 3 of these scans and collect them. The first is mandatory, and the other one, the extended missions, are the plus. And if we are really lucky, then early in the next decade, they will be returned to Earth, where the rocket goes into the Martian orbit and then returns to Earth. The big advantage of getting samples from Mars and Earth is, of course, you can have laboratories with hundreds of scientists that work on them and investigate them and analyze them and get results. And you can repeat this in 50 years, so to say, with new instrumentation. So you can never do something like this on a small rover that has a box of, say, 30 kilograms on Mars, which has wonderful analytical abilities, but it's not enough, of course, to get a big picture. And they started sampling late last year, I think in September. The first successful sample was taken. You see here the two drill holes in this rock in the center. And you see a photograph of one of these sample tubes. And this is now stored. They have, I think, 8 samples taken, maybe 9, I'm not so sure. And all in all, in a very technical discipline, I want to show the next pictures I love so much because it shows what it needs to get these results. It's the people behind all these experiments and the constructions and the financing and the organizing and the begging and the discussions and all these things. And that's not the whole team, because that was imaged in March 2020, when the Europeans could not participate anymore due to Corona. So that was Mars. Mars is, of course, the hot target for getting people to. But when talking about life and looking for life in the solar system, then we should not forget to mention the satellites of Jupiter and Saturn and even some more exotic places. That's why Europe is sending the JUICE mission next year with the last Ariane 5 launch from Peru to the Julian system that will arrive in 2032 and will focus on Europa and Ganymede, but also have a look to Callisto, Io, and Jupiter itself. Europa, of course, we know since the Galileo mission of the late 90s, is the place where we think, and there are really good arguments, that under its minus 170 degree a cold surface, there must be an ocean, because the surface is so young, it doesn't show any craters. It shows minerals on the surface, it shows ridges where water was pressed up to the surface, it distributed, and that's a model to the left. It's a model of how we think currently Europa has a subcrustal ocean, which could be 100 to 200 kilometers deep. So having more water than all oceans on Earth combined. And if it's true that Europa gets enough heat for some volcanic action in its rocky mantle from tidal heating from Jupiter and the alignment and the resonance of the 3 Julian satellites, then of course the water might be circulating like on Earth through these rocks and leaching out minerals, which of course is interesting for the idea that life of a completely different type and style has been evolved, has a chance to survive there. And from the minerals, we know when you look at the surface, you see when you look back, you see different colors here. It's not white ice, it's brown and it's orange. So we think, and also supported by the results from the Galileo spectrometer at that time, that we have minerals from the mantle of Europa on the surface, and that comes because it was solved as ions in the ocean. So, towards the end, we have another exotic place that could harbor life, which is Enceladus. We have Titan, the largest moon in the solar system, which is also very cold, but we think that there's also a layer of water, though very deep, hidden under the surface in 50 to 80 kilometers maybe. On the surface, we have different stuff. We have methane and methane, and of course, the current situation with the food prices maybe becomes a really interesting place to get some of this stuff here on the Ally pit stop. We have been there on Titan, very interesting mission. The Huygens probe that was pushed by the Cassini spacecraft into the atmosphere of Titan. It's funny that Cassini-Huygens double mission, since these two scientists, these two astronomers, they didn't like each other at all. So Huygens had to fly with Cassini. I think that was a nightmare for him. But of course, we learned very much from this mission, from the atmosphere, from the surface too. There has been decided on a Uranus mission by NASA, which is not yet so clear what it will look like. And of course, we want to look to Triton, the biggest satellite of Neptune, which is very interesting. And some people even think that Pluto, even more distant, could have liquid reservoirs under the surface because we have so flat surface like Sputnik Planum, where you have no crater at all. And you look at this picture of Sputnik Planum and the mountain ranges. That's my favorite image of the New Horizons mission. That's a fantastic world, and probably we will not have it in our life again to visit Pluto because of its orbital characteristics. And then there are the comets. So they are even more distant than Pluto, and Europe is launching a mission called Comet Interceptor to place a spacecraft at a L2 point, to be ready to chase for a comet that comes from the outer solar system, maybe even from the Oort cloud, a long periodical comet to intercept him when he's in the solar system, to get new results on whether life ingredients can get comets to the Earth. And finally, we look at the asteroids. They are also considered to bring complex carbon molecules to Earth, but also are dangerous in some cases. Lucy is a mission going for Tellurian asteroids, which are on the orbit of Jupiter and might be from the Kuiper Belt area and having a more carbon freight in them. So they are very interesting also regarding the question how life came to Earth. And finally, we have the first mission that tries to redirect an asteroid, the double asteroid redirection test, DART from NASA, that will impact on the asteroid Dimorphos on September 26. Hopefully they hit it really perfectly. Then 2 Italian CubeSats will photograph this, and you can also follow this maybe with a big telescope here on the roof, because it's only 11 million kilometers distance from Earth, and you will see whether we can change an orbit of a near Earth or an Earth crossing asteroid. These are the dimensions of these two, and ESA will follow up with a mission called HERA that will check. It will be launched next year, and will look to 2024 what really happened at this impact, so we can make prudent decisions for the hazards that come from the Earth asteroids. I simply want to mention that we should go back to the moon. This is, of course, this is true already, because we need more science from the moon, besides all the other aspects. Jack Schmidt, that was now 50 years ago, was on the moon, and we should have new samples from the South Croatian basin on the far side. And you all know about the Artemis program, what's going on there. And I will end up with this wonderful picture from Matthias Maurer. He shot recently when he was at the International Space Station. And in these weeks, when the German schools are, they have the holidays soon, and in the last 2 weeks, traditionally, they have to make a work on 20 pages about a specific topic. And I get so many requests, could you help me please to explain how to terraform Mars and how to grow trees on Venus and how to transport ice from Europa to Venus to cool it and all these things. And I think it's of course very interesting and important to discuss how to colonize Mars, but you all know spaceflight is a very conservative technology or thing. You always do one step after the other. You never do the 5th step before the 1st step. And of course, in these days, we have a couple of problems with our own Earth, and we should focus at least beside all the other things in space. I'm a space maniac, of course, but we should focus very much on saving this planet here because it's a very beautiful one. It has such a thin atmosphere, and we should keep open our dreams for, what is it, the next one, this blue mountain, the pale blue dot, and we could imagine, of course, how it is living on a world like the TRAPPIST planets, because maybe they have one more things there. Thank you.
very much for this voyage through the various objects, the solar system that we can explore with humans and robotically, or maybe when we are developing some android or superhuman that can go to Titan temperature. So, is there any question from Uli? Yeah. So if not, I propose that okay, we go to the next talk, and then we'll have a panel where I will ask the speakers that are still alive to come on stage, and we are going to debate some questions. So the next talk, if by our good friend and colleague Jim Crisafulli, that is connected from. And he will talk about his worldwide initiative for collaboration in space. Jim?
Hello, aloha.
Aloha.
Adriano is going to advance the slides for us because we were having challenges with share screen. So if you can bring up the first slide. Let's see.
Moment.
Okay.
Because I have to remake everything working like before.
Okay. So we go back. So we have a little break. How long? 1 minute?
Yeah, no, 30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds. That's good. So maybe you can you do a little Hawaiian dance, Jim, in the meantime?
Ooh. Well, actually, I'm feeding my little pet gecko right now, but he's dancing around. If I could just get him on camera, I think you'd really enjoy this. I don't know how.
Talking about Hawaii.
Yeah, Jim, introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah.
I'm Jim Crisafulli, and I'm serving as the president of ACES Worldwide. And that person that just spoke was Dr. Joe Pelton, and he's the chairman of our board. And Joe, did you want to say something about ACES? Joe, can you hear me?
Yeah, he mentioned ACES earlier, so I think now is your time. But yeah,
okay.
I mean, you're happy to share.
Okay.
If you want to do it, you are welcome.
Yeah, and I'll just say advance the screen as we go from slide to slide. Anyway, first slide. Let's see here.
Moment.
Okay, if you can go back to the first slide.
The first slide.
There you go. That's it. Yeah. So, aloha and mahalo nui loa to Space Renaissance International for this delightful opportunity to present an overview of the Alliance for Collaboration in the Exploration of Space, also known as ACES Worldwide, and to the stellar pioneers participating in the Space Renaissance Art and Festival, Science Festival in Berlin. Next slide, please. So humanity is now embarking on a most innovative and inspiring era of space exploration and development, and you're all part of this team moving humanity forward to the stars. Public and private space institutions and educational and training organizations and regulatory agencies worldwide are pursuing truly innovative approaches now to where technological, financial, and governmental that could help expand and diversify pioneering space enterprise for all humankind. But opportunities are also being explored to apply space-related technologies and resources in most creative ways that ultimately could significantly help improve and sustain life on our home planet and expand humankind's reach for the stars. Next slide, please. ACES Worldwide is a space-related alliance. We created this to enhance international space ventures that ultimately could help make space enterprise more collaborative and environmentally sustainable, engaging all spirited pioneers from planet Earth. Its primary goals are to promote both public and private ventures, to expand and diversify space education and training programs, to enhance a broad range of space safety standards, and to advance the long-term goals of sustainable space activities, ultimately helping to make these more equitable and affordable, to expand and enhance their significant environmental benefits, and to accelerate timetables for peaceful space enterprise that ultimately could benefit nations worldwide. Next slide, please. ACES is worldwide is reaching out to both spacefaring and non-spacefaring nations, space agencies, other space-related organizations worldwide, including but not limited to members of the International Astronautical Federation, participants in COSPAR, and all members and observers of the UN COPUOS program. Organizations that are working with ACES worldwide in our roundtable discussions, have alliance agreements with ACES, or participate on our global advisory board include Space Renaissance International, McGill University's Institute for Air and Space Law, the European Space Policy Institute, the International Association for the Advancement of Space Safety, International Space University, Space for Africa, For All Moonkind, and over a dozen additional organizations. Next slide, please. A number of key issues are being focused on now with ACES, and these are expanding as time progresses, but the first key issue is space safety. We're talking about public safety during launches, controlled reentries of spacecraft, commercial space flights, and hypersonic transports. Also, environmental protection and sustainability relating to space debris, atmospheric and ground pollution, and nuclear and radiation protection. Ground personnel protection from space operations and aborted launches, space situational awareness to enhance both space traffic control and on-orbit services, both promoting and enabling widely applicable global space standards and regulations for space operations, and with a special near-term focus on potential cosmic hazards, as well as planetary defense from such hazards. Next slide, please. Sarah, another key issue we're looking at is on-orbit servicing and active space debris removal. Education and training and public awareness is going to be very important here. Also to enhance space situational awareness, focusing on space insurance and risk assessment and all the issues related to those items. Liability conventions and legal constraints, space debris reuse for space infrastructure construction, standards for rendezvous and proximity operations, improved debris removal and mitigation policies, and issues related to new large-scale LEO constellations. Next slide, please. Another key issue, which is really going to impact humankind broadly, is space education and training. We believe all nations can benefit from space enterprise that promotes student education and training, a better understanding of the use of space technologies and systems to advance economic, environmental, and other key developmental goals. All nations need space tools and analytics to monitor global pollution, weather, and climate change. Space education and training will also be key to achieving the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. And new teleeducation and telehealth systems can aid the global south, as well as capacity building for nations initiating new space programs. Next slide, please. Institutional, legal, and financial arrangements for space initiatives will be key here. We're talking about new types and methods for implementing public-private partnerships and international alliances, improved education and training programs, as well as enhanced concepts and definitions related to space systems and activities, and long-term sustainability of space and environmental policies and regulations. Next slide, please. Another key issue is research related to cosmic hazards and planetary defense, coronal mass ejections, and solar flares are key here. Potentially hazardous asteroids, comets and how to defend against them, antimatter, supernovas, cosmic hazards research and warning systems, and planetary defense systems, preparedness, and solar shields to protect humankind. Next slide, please. Another key issue, space-related enterprise to enhance global sustainability. We're talking about development of global sustainability, treaties and related space applications and educational programs and concepts, the inauguration of remote sensing and global pollution monitoring concepts, data analytics and educational programs, radio frequency monitoring from space and environmental applications, space systems addressing ocean acidity and global warming, and space systems to monitor global pollution and innovative ways to address critical sustainability issues. Next slide, please. Of course, another key issue is going to be research related to lunar and other off-world settlements on the moon, on Mars, or in Gerard O'Neill cylinders. What are the ethics of expanding civilizations into outer space? What technologies are required to enable sustainable off-world settlements? The potential sizes and locations of sustainable space colonies and how they could be developed, governed, and sustainably operated, and potential biological seeds to grow livable structures in space. Next slide, please. So finally, the key questions concerning the future of ACES worldwide. How can and should ACES worldwide optimally be administered to help realize its full potential, to help advance global collaboration in space enterprise? And of course, your input here will be most appreciated. How could a roadmap be developed to help prioritize and guide ACES Worldwide's activities and long-term goals? What operational strategies could best help initiate and enhance global engagement with ACES Worldwide? And are there opportunities and sustainable roles for lesser developed and non-spacefaring nations to engage with space enterprise? And if so, how could ACES Worldwide help realize this potential? Next slide, please. Our last slide. We surely would welcome your participation in this enterprise. And please contact us if you'd like more information on how best to engage. And these are our two contacts, Dr. Joe Pelton, who's also on this Zoom session, chairman of ACES Worldwide, and myself as president. Mahalo.
Mahalo, merci. Thank you.
Il n'y a pas de quoi.
So, is there any question for Jim? Or you want to go to Hawaii to debate directly with him? Yeah.
Come.
Yes. And actually, we are planning in November to have a joint event in Hawaii. So it could be between 11 and 13 November, where we would have an event co-sponsored by Space Renaissance, by Galix, by ACES, and also by Human Mars, the International Moon Base Alliance. And we are also planning to have some astronaut simulation in our ICES moon base. There we will have also some young professionals practicing as astronauts. And so we are planning to use this opportunity to advance our proposal for expanding into space, but also developing social and economical benefits.
Très magnifique.
Very good. So now I would like just to have a 10 minutes panel to wrap up everybody. So I would like to call up to some of the speakers of today. Maybe Dirk, if you could come on stage, and also Uli. And we try to, let's have some diversity. Maybe, and let's invite one of our, please come on stage. Let's ask them some questions. Yes, please come. Join us on stage. Yes, yes, you. And as well. Okay, here you can go here.
You have to stand.
Yes, let's go on stage. Okay,
Yes, the old man is taking on stage. Come on.
And we have a special, a reporter with us. And so we are going to, we have been asked some questions. Like for instance, so today we had philosophy and policy and society. And so one question that we had is
Maybe you should get the ones from the German section there.
from
There's the German section to get those people down here too.
Oh, are they finished with their session or?
They're probably finished by now. So I didn't have many.
Okay, please can you call the participants from the German session? Could you fetch them so that they would join the wrap-up panel? Yes, you know where they are in the other room? Oh, so they are in the you can, upstairs. You can ask them to join in. So okay, so let's address a question which was directly we handled today. So yeah, so we had an inaugural session program to boost civilian space development. So okay, so let's ask you. So what would you think that Space Renaissance International should do? We have exposed some of the action plan. Do you see some gaps into this vision, or does it connect also to some of your interests, research-wide or others? Yes, so yes. Werner?
Yes, I think it was a very interesting day today. Unfortunately, we have a very small audience, but it doesn't matter. Yes, my conclusion is, or one of my conclusions is the following. I think Mars and the outer solar system should just be a target for scientific purpose. I think we should concentrate and focus in the next 100 years on the space near Earth, on the moon and then the Lagrangian points. And we should try to industrialize this region and to settle in this region. I think this is my conclusion of today.
Yeah, some room for industrialization. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, I was 2 years, 3 or 4 years ago at the NASA meeting of what their target is for 2050. So yes, their 50-year plan. And I think there was one problem, I think, because there was too many very different things. So there was a group that wanted to go to the outer solar system, a group wanted to go to Mars, a group wanted to protect from asteroids and so. While this is all great and so to do, I think there's something, I mean, this is all expensive, so there has to be a focus on something. And I mean, the research, of course, in our field should go on, but I think actually what you are advocating, the village on the moon also, I think this is actually from space exploration point of view, that maybe really what should the priority be, because there you can get the private space companies in. And I mean, obviously the first step is the moon, because it's simply so close before we can launch something bigger on Mars. I mean, I really like to see a human mission to Mars. I like to see life detection on mission. But doing that, the next goal with the moon, and then getting the private space companies, then I think from a space exploration point, that could be one of the priority.
So about village of the moon. So okay, there are some different pillars that we could think of to do it for science. So listen to it, because I'm going to quiz you on this. Should we do it for science? So who is for science on the moon? Right.
Can I react from the distance?
Science on the moon, yes. Technology on the moon. Should we test new technologies?
Yeah, one thing to it.
Yeah.
Regarding moon and science on the moon, I mean, for astrobiology, for the origin of life, that is probably the only place where we can get some idea how the origin of life happened on our planet, because there's remnants on the southern pole of moon.
Yeah.
Basically covered in the ice.
Yeah, we could have sampled from early life on Earth, which, you know, have been impacted, distributed, and then landed on the moon. like in the attic, you know, you have all your toys in your attic, and you be the attic of the Earth.
Yes.
But let's continue the quiz.
My point.
Yeah.
Maybe you can stimulate other.
No, village of the moon. Let's finish because I want to survey technology. Should we do it for business? Who wants to make jobs on the moon? Jobs on the moon. Should we create new categories of jobs? Should we have just do it as for inspiration, for outreach, or just for space renaissance, the new culture?
Bernard, can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, that's Jan. Okay, so now, Jan, you are part of the panel, so that's...
Yes, yes, I tried all the time. I raised my hand. Yeah. I think what we have to do, we, not some other person, but what we have to do is we really have to decide what we believe is important. And there is something. If you want to have public money for whatever you like to do, whether science or whatever, then you need a clear narrative. So why should the politicians with taxpayer money support space? And there are some reasons. Yes, for instance, science, for instance, curiosity, inspiration for young people, blah, 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 blah. Then you have a clear path. Or you say, no, what we want to do is we are just saying whoever would like to do some commercial activities is welcome. Then you have a totally different narrative. So we should not mix up all these different aspects. Of course, the moon is an excellent place to do science and to do technology and to do commercialization at the same time. But I believe we have really, if we want to be successful with the politicians, we have really to create a narrative which is convincing, and convincing not for us, but for the politicians. We can agree immediately, let's go to Mars, to moon first, then to Mars and further on. But we need to convince politicians and to need to convince the general public. And this is a bigger task. That's what I believe.
Yeah, okay, so, but still, I mean, in my village, my real village on Earth, we have all these aspects covered. So I think if we want to bring our society, our community, I think we have to have a narrative that speaks to many. And a politician is supposed to take care of everybody. So, but clearly, yeah, we need to have a clear idea of, okay, how we bring benefits back to us. So, yes, so good to have this debate about Moon Village. Now let's move to another question. So Adriano, you wanted to introduce another point?
I want to spend one more word for strategy. As I said before, when we concluded the discussion after the Bob Zubrin speech, we should not forget, when we talk about moving, starting the settlement, that we need to give priority to the needs to do that and to the sustainability. So the first point of sustainability is the reusable, fully reusable vehicles. And maybe we will have one of these things this year, we hope. The second point, Jeff Gleason said it already in 2017, and I could never stop thanking Jeff Gleason for his sharp vision. The second step is producing fuel in space, because that will downsize the cost of any mission. So my answer, what should we do on the moon, what should we do on the asteroid, is start mining resources to produce fuel. This is key. And of course, developing technologies and developing science and going to the far side to put an observatory, that will be, and all the scientific goals are perfect. But we, in my opinion, priority should be to work, to mine, to produce fuel, to develop the industrialization. About
okay, thank you. Let's hear the panel. What about this fuel from the moon? Industrialization, any comment? Actually, maybe I could say that I made an estimate of how much fuel we have on the moon. If you estimate how much the surface of the moon is in permanent shadow, you have 14,000 square kilometers, and we have measured that in this area you have about 5% of ice. So if you do calculation, we would have 1 billion tons of water accessible in the first 2 meters. So we are not going to use it all. That would be, well, we want to save it for the next generation. But with that, we could produce significant amounts of water for life support for our moon base, but also for fuel to make a spaceport from the moon, and also to have fuel that could be used to refuel some of the telecom satellites which come at end of life. And there you have a very big market. So that's one contribution we can do with real numbers. So you have a question on this?
I don't have a question.
When?
I have something to address that I remember this is a place where Einstein talked about relativity. And I remember in later years of Einstein, he said that he was not fully happy about the nuclear technology that he found because it was eventually weaponized. And what I want to address is that maybe this time we can do it better, like when we explore the space and when we develop further technology. Let's do it peacefully and let's give a fair share to everybody, not that someone gets everything and something becomes weaponized.
Yes, so science without conscience is only ruin of the soul. That's what the French philosopher said. So clearly, ability to power must go together with responsibility. So I think that, but any comment from my panel on this? So, yes. Okay, let's have our scientist and we have our theologian. So
yeah, I want to come back to this aspect of mining on the moon, which is of course a very good idea since we know that we have water in North and South Pole craters. But I'm a geologist, and you know that mining is the dirtiest and hardest business here on Earth. You know, it's heavy machines. It's in an industrial scale. It's really not easy to accomplish. So this will be very difficult, and there has not been the least try to do with one of the in situ missions to do something on either Mars or the Moon or one of the asteroids. So this will be a long way, but of course it's the important big step to get it to Mars, probably the key to get it financially makeable, you know. And the other thing what Jan Lerner says is of course true. You need a story, you need a narrative. But what happens when the Chinese, who have their narrative, we are the greatest nation in the world, and we want to go with people to Mars as first, we will do this in the next 10 years. Will we then start running, or will we start considering what is our story?
Yeah, so, yes, Michael? Well, I have a story about that. I'm trying to convince my American to hurry up. Otherwise, when they arrive, there will be already Chinese restaurant on the moon base. So, yes, Michael.
I can play off of that. Just to go from where you went and from where you went with the Chinese restaurant, I think we need to be very aware of one thing. It's called reification. You build things that embody ideas. And if we build a moon village or anything in outer space, what we do is we create something that is a cultural construct. But if it is on another celestial body, it will be a natural habitat for the people who live there. So what we do is we create the second nature. And that second nature will bring forth the next generation.
Could he speak up? It's hard to hear.
Sorry, you want me to talk louder? Yeah, okay, so what I said is we will build something that will be a natural environment for people, but it will be a cultural construct, which should make us even more careful what kind of nature we will construct for future generations. I don't know if the peace narrative is the one to go for, or if the economics narrative is the one to go for, but we should certainly be aware that we will reify that narrative. And your example of mining or strip mining is a very good example of what you reify if you mine something. So I just wanted to point that out. Yeah, we will build culture that will be nature, and that might be a problem or a big chance for us.
Exactly. So that's a great challenge, but also a great opportunity, for instance, to show that we can do this question in a sustainable way. And also, actually, at COSPA, we are also looking at this aspect, protecting, for example, the scientific environment of the moon for future generations, So we have to protect some places where there is ice, for instance, so that you could measure if there are some remnant of hundreds of comets that were there. But eventually we should just have some places where you could extract the water ice, which is not so bad in terms of mining and just extracting minerals and so on. And actually, it's a way also to show that we are able to put together a governance which is more sustainable, which is more international. So it's also a sustainable social construct internationally. So that's something that's also a great challenge. And I see that in the vision of Moon Village, that's something also where we can do a lot of thoughts on the social international aspect. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, with space exploration, the narrative is really easy why you want to have space exploration, because we don't want to follow the footsteps of the dinosaurs. You know, if we don't have anything in space, then we will be gone soon. So we'll be gone. Yeah, petrified or something like this. Yeah, and the thing is, with the competition, what comes now into space, you know, with the Chinese going to Mars, have a lander there, and if that becomes some kind of a competition between China and NASA, well, as long as they don't shoot at each other, fine, that's good. Then, because that's how Apollo happened as well. You know, you had actually done people on the moon. That was the space race between Russians and Americans, but it really sped things up. And then afterwards, you know, the Kumbaya didn't make much. We didn't have much going on. We had a couple of space missions, but we didn't make the giant strides that we made during the Apollo mission.
Mm-hmm.
So it is both. You have to have a balance, I think. And a little bit competition may not hurt.
So let's go back to the question that Rock asked before, because you talked about China, US, and so on. But what about Europe? What is our role into going to the moon and adding humans to Mars? Europe. So who has a point?
You know the system better than I do, right? If you want to have something with ESA, then you propose a space mission, and then yes, everyone wants to participate, and you want to have everyone in it, but everyone wants to pay as little as possible to the mission, right? And that's why you never get something really big.
Yeah, but okay, we have ESA, which I think is very effective in delivering some of the mission, sometime in at the planned launch date, but also we have the rest of investment. We have other companies which are not yet into space, and when we tell them, oh, we have an 8 continent the moon, time to invest there. So can we get also some of the European industry and some of the other stakeholders from Europe to contribute?
I think it has to do something with the mentality, right? So if the American mentality is a little bit the cowboy mentality, right? You're at the frontier, you want to explore, you want to get to new places and so on. And that is very well accepted in the society. Here in Europe, it's like we are more kind of inverted or something like, think about certain other things, and it's difficult for people to chip in and to give the money, to give the resources. I mean, it was kind of devastating that they didn't want to even give 50 cents, what was it, a year or a month or something like this for space exploration.
But Jan mentioned that they think that we spend €250 per year.
Yeah. No. The people. The citizens ask for 280 euros per citizen per year, but in fact, ESA gets about 8 euros per citizen per year, so a very small contribution. But you see, you are totally right. The Americans they proposed at a certain point in time this ARM mission. You remember the asteroid redirection mission, and this mission could not find any interest in Europe, because it was just based on pioneering. I had a discussion at that time with another administrator and told him, you see, if you want to have Europe with that project together, you have to have a totally different narrative. Pioneering and prestige is not enough. But if you go for real science like gravitational waves or like whatever, or for instance also James Webb Space Telescope, you immediately see that Europe is ready to pay a big contribution because its science is accepted, and it's also getting good return for the industry. So it is really depending on the narrative. That's what I want to mention. And we do not have to play the competition in the same way as in the 60s of last century. Cooperation is also possible. Of course, competition is also a driver, but cooperation is an enabler, as we see with many programs. And the Moon Village is, from the idea, it's an international idea and not a national and not a competitive idea. But I have to accept that competition is a driver. Yes.
So I see that we are reaching about the end of the time we allotted for the panel. And so we have planned also a bit of time for you to connect, to network, to work on project. And so at 18:30, we are planning to have a welcome reception, drink and snacks. So now that I have my colleague on stage, I want to address them a challenge, of course, which is we are not going to the moon only with science, with technology. We will go with humanities and arts. So for this reason, I have prepared to you a little exercise. So you are going to perform flying to the moon. Okay, anybody can do that? Okay, you have to share this. Do you know the lyrics of Flying to the Moon? Who knows the lyrics of Flying to the Moon?
You see, Bernard, to go to the moon is not difficult. Take a sheet of paper and fold it 42 times, and you are at the moon.
Okay, yeah, please, all of you that can help, and as a transition to a cocktail, we are going to try that. So we start with that. Okay. How many sheets? 1, 2. Okay. What about this we here? Okay. Oh, these are all the. Okay. 1. Yeah. Okay, we do this one. Okay, you go wrong. Okay, we have the deep contact. 1. You can sit there. Okay, yes.
And let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, darling, kiss me. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore.
Latinos. I expect all of you to know all these lyrics by heart. And we have a few other Moon and Mars songs that really we will have to practice. But we have the chance to have a beautiful piano on stage. We have a cast of panelists and singers. If some of you also want to bring your voice, that's great. So, which is, I want to thank all the speakers today. I want to thank also our public online for their resilience to our singing performance, and to the technical staff, the Arsenal Observatory, for hosting us in a great place. And so I propose that we have like a 15 minutes networking, talking about project while we are preparing the cocktail, which we start in 15 minutes at 6:30. And tomorrow we start sharp. What time is it? At 9 o'clock. 9:15, but let's be here at 9. Yeah, at 9 o'clock today. So thanks for a great day. Where do we go? We go to we go to okay.